3 minutes after 10, a very good morning indeed to you. A bit of a strange one this morning. There are no stories. I'm clamouring for our attention. I like that word. Clamouring. There are no stories really clamouring for our attention. So let's sort of have a look around and see what might intrigue us. How are we going to get a topic out of the barges and the increasingly diabolical policies that these disgusting politicians are deploying in the hope of further demonising some of the most vulnerable people on the planet? I don't know. They're desperate to turn it into a culture war, aren't they? Reports today on the front of the Mail about, if we can't send them to Rwanda, we'll send them somewhere else, some island in the middle of the sea somewhere. And you sort of, hang on, I thought that Suella Braverman had staked her reputation on the Rwanda plan. I grant you, she hasn't got much of a reputation to stake, but I just don't sense, and I'm normally a fairly adept chronicler of the ebb and flow of bile in the British media, I just don't sense this one landing in the way that the government seem desperate for it to land, and that would be a way into a conversation perhaps, but not today. I'll put that on my to-do list and work out an intriguing way, an interesting way of turning our attention to that. I am drawn to the story that would see bosses, employers and landlords essentially charged with operating our immigration policy. My gut reaction to that was that, again, it's an attempt to sort of, I was supposed to be suspicious of all nail bars, car washes, construction firms, social care and hospitality venues. Is it a buck-passing exercise by politicians? That's the problem with cuts, isn't it? They generally leave holes, but or is it perfectly reasonable and feasible? But I want to begin with this story. I want to begin with the story about the World Triathlon Series and the event in the Northeast this weekend that saw a significant number of contestants apparently contract illnesses, and many people understandably concluding that it's probably to do with the water. It is open to investigation, but testing by the Environment Agency on July the 26th, 3 days before the event, showed that there were 3,900 E. coli colonies. I'm going to do something that is probably ill-advised in a minute. I'm going to rely on a Twitter correspondent for expertise. There were 3,900 E. coli colonies per 100 millilitres of water, which is nearly 40 times higher than in June, the previous month. That's a bacterial infection that can cause diarrhoea, cramps and fever. And those are indeed, forgive me if you're having your brunch or your early 11s, those are indeed the conditions that seem to have struck down at least 57 competitors from the World Triathlon Championship Series. Now, a bloke has responded to this, who is responsible for 3 public swimming pools in Spain. And he says that the permitted E. coli density, cultured from the monthly sampling that he does, is 0 per 100 millilitres. If it goes even up to 1 colony per 100 millilitres, he writes, we hyperchlorinate, close the pool and change the water. And this coastal water up in Sunderland, near Sunderland, had 3,900 E. coli colonies per 100 millilitres of water. That is, pretty grim. I don't think it's unique to the UK. I think there was an event in Paris that was curtailed because of the quality of the water in the Seine this weekend as well. So, we're not unique. We're not alone in having these conditions. But we did about a year ago. I don't know how bored you get when I share with you the machinations and the contemplations that I undergo every morning before I avail myself of the privilege of talking to you. But there are some stories that are stories but not phone-ins. And I as I get older, the longer I've been doing this job, I consider it to be it's a challenge, it's a duty almost, to turn the stories that aren't phone-ins into phone-ins. I want to find ways that with the climate, it's the most obvious way of doing it. Keeping climate change front and centre, keeping it in the heart of the conversation without being repetitious or sanctimonious or inviting weirdos shouting China onto the pro. That's the challenge. And I did the same with water. We can't disturb Fergal Sharkey's morning on a weekly basis. The brilliance of his publicising and analysis of problems in our waterways is one of the main reasons I think why we're all so aware of it. But you can't start badgering him every 20 minutes because you've decided you're going to talk about filthy water again. It wouldn't be fair on him. Although last time we decided not to bother Fergal because we were having a conversation about the filth in our waters, he was actually listening and rang in anyway, like a normal punter. So the best laid plans of mice and men. I think we happened upon a really good way of doing it a few months ago. It may even have been nearly a year. Was it even last summer? We just thought we'd ask what it's like now. So I'm not a surfer, you will be unsurprised to learn, although I did a little bit of bodyboarding in Sri Lanka once. So I'm not a surfer. And this year we went to Greece for our summer holiday. I'm not, I don't know why I'm boring you with the details of my seaside behaviour, but I've spent a lot of time in North Norfolk, but I'm not a big one for getting in the water if it's cold. I've got to be honest with you. So I don't really know. I did a little bit of wild swimming in the River Thames during lockdown, but we all did weird things during lockdown, didn't we? And that was an absolute joy. So I just want to know what's changed. So have a look at a broad period of time, a long period of time, which you have done, spending time in water in the United Kingdom, okay? So you might be a big swimmer, you might just do your summer holiday, your sandcastles and kiss me quick hats. You might be a surfer, you might do a little bit of paddle boarding, fishing, I guess. Well, you're unlikely to get sick fishing, unless you eat the fish, I suppose. But do you see what I mean? You have a relationship with the waters of these islands. And just mentioning that we are an island nation reminds us that in many ways water is more crucial to our national identity than it is to many other countries. So you personally, I'm talking to you now. Yes, you have a relationship with the waters, with the UK waters, whether it's waterways or coastal waters. Possibly your livelihood depends upon it. It may be that your job depends upon it. There's a little paddleboarding company near me that's brilliant, and you see them doing children's birthdays and things like that. And I think the River Brent is all right. People are going to send me statistics now saying whatever you do, don't get into the River Brent. But I think it's all right, and that's a lovely little addition to the local community. But what is the reality now of the release of raw sewage? Okay, what do you know to be the case? Because your relationship with the water is changing, okay? If you hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Because although British Triathlon insists that the test results that I cited a moment ago were from outside the area of water where the race took place, and that its own testing had passed the required standards for the event, you see a headline, triathletes fall sick after sea swimming. And given the direction of traffic in this country over the last couple of years, you think inevitably, I wonder what they've been swimming through. They've been swimming through shocking amounts of sewage. That's one for the bingo card, isn't it? I do it on purpose. I start making you think I'm going to say a naughty word, and then I don't. I say shocking amounts of sewage. Have to be on my toes for that. Have to be concentrating. But you can't look me in the eye and tell me that you hear a story about essentially a swimming competition in the sea off Sunderland, and 57 competitors at least are struck down with some pretty grim health conditions. And it was at Roker. We have Whitburn North Bathing Water. The local water company, Northumbrian Water, insists that they haven't done any discharges of their assets. But the reason why I'm suspicious of the testing is because, well, water moves, doesn't it? You don't need to be a physicist to understand that. But that's the background. And if it turns out that isn't the reason why all these lads got sick and all these ladies got sick, then that's fine. But it doesn't actually change the central thrust of my inquiry of you this morning, my question to you this morning, which is what's going on? Now that we've had a little bit of summer, you might be over actually, looking at some of the forecasts, but you got away during hot June. Kids broke up couple of weeks ago. You've got to the seaside, or you're using the water in a way that you have traditionally done, and you've noticed a difference. You've noticed what is it like? That's the question I've got for you, because, well, it seems to me to be a fairly fundamental element of our lives, actually. The idea that 13 years of Conservative rule may have contributed to a massive deterioration in the simple quality of the water that is coursing through our towns or swilling around our coastlines it's absolutely shocking when you think about it. And yet here we are now almost chalking it up as another one of those things that we talk about on a regular basis without any really meaningful prospect of significant change or improvement. So what we need to do today is just find out what is going on. If you have experience of this, if you have a relationship with the water and you can actually help the rest of us come to a slightly clearer conclusion about how bad things really are, or indeed how bad things really aren't, then you are front of the queue this morning. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Matt tells me to ask about what happened at Ironman in Wales last year. He's heard stories of people having to dash into spectators' houses during the marathon. I don't think you need me to explain why that might be. But I just want to know. I don't want big scientific analysis. I don't want big, sweeping. I just want to know you as a user of British waters. You can tell us that or how things have got worse. 0345 6060 973. 10:16 is the time, and there's something else on my mind this morning that I wanted to share with you. It's one of those days where I'm very conscious of this being several countries, not one. As we prepare to talk about the waterways, the idea that it should be a bigger scandal, the idea that it should be a much greater issue, even though it's grown in stature enormously over the last couple of years, it's down to where you are and where you live, right? If you're living by the seaside and you're routinely, or you live near a river and there's routinely effluent being pumped into it, that to you is a huge issue. But the majority of us don't have that kind of relationship with water. So I think that idea of that sort of geographical relationship is really interesting. And the other story that very much fits, well, there's two other stories today that fit into that category. I love talking about buses, but it's a completely different conversation if you're outside a big city. There's a brilliant editorial in The Guardian today about the madness of the bus service outside big cities, outside towns. And the other one is a story about first-time buyers moving out of London into the countryside. Do you see what I mean? So that story, for example, there's very much two ends to the telescope. You are someone who can't afford to buy a place in London, so you're moving out. But how do the people who live in the area that you're moving to feel about the fact that their younger first-time buyers are more likely now to be priced out of the area where they grew? So anyway, there's quite a lot to get our teeth into today, but it is just for the record, one of those days where I'm very conscious of speaking to several different countries rather than just one. 10:18 is the time. Alex is in Whitstable, beside the seaside. What would you like to say, Alex?
Hello, yes. I've been coming down here for quite a while. I'm now living near, and we've definitely got a problem here. Tankerton Beach was a blue flag, although it shouldn't have been, because we've got 3 outlets where they dump, and I've noticed that there's definitely less people swimming in the sea. We've had dogs with E. coli, problems, and probably humans as well. And we've got there's a group called SOS Whitstable here that off their own back, they test the water. They're continually sending it to Southern Water.
Yes.
And it's noticeably different.
When did it change? Because this is why I'm interested in people who've had a longer relationship with the waters. When did it change? When did you notice?
Last year.
Was it really that recently?
Yeah.
It's really gone off a cliff in recent years.
Yeah,
Pardon
definitely.
the pun.
Yeah.
Would you go in the water still? Would you go in it yourself?
No, and I did last year, and I know people were talking about it then, and things have changed within the water as well. Like I don't know why, there's more starfish. Not starfish. Yeah, there is more starfish. More.
It's getting
warmer.
The
water looks different. Yeah. It's not the same. It's not as good really, and it's sad because it's affecting holiday trade, businesses, and I don't understand how. I mean, they say it's an overflow of when it rains, but it isn't. There's been when it was hot this year and we didn't have any rain, they were still doing it. So it's it's not. It's. I don't understand how you can have health and safety, and they obviously don't. It doesn't apply to them.
No, well, that's something we'll add to the conversation, actually. Because I think last time we talked about this, we were left slightly baffled by how they'd been able to get away with it, especially while many of the water companies were still delivering enormous dividends to their shareholders and executives and the like. But I think, infrastructure is the obvious answer, but ethically how they've been allowed to get away with it is a huge question. There's stories not long ago, I think it was in April of this year, that Whitstable's famous oyster beds were threatened with absolute obliteration. There you go, here it is. The Whitstable Oyster Fishery Company was devastated last summer following revelations of sewage leaks along the water. A public meeting in February, fishermen condemned the water company for destroying the Kent town's reputation for seafood. That's the kind of example of what I was touching on before I spoke to Alex. The idea that in an objective universe, this would be a much bigger deal than it is, but we only turn our attention to it if we're local, as Alex is, or if something like this story from the northeast about triathletes all falling sick after swimming in the sea. I never got the hang of this. This idea of what determines the scale of a story. I was on holiday in Greece when Nigel Farage was sort of dominating the news agenda because he had to bank with a high street bank. He had to bank with a high street bank. I sat looking at that story thinking, I know the Telegraph have to pretend it's a really big deal and stuff like that, because if they start telling the truth about him, then the truth about Brexit will follow. But I just read the story and thought, God, that's terrible. You can't take away someone's bank account. I read it again and he was just being told you can't bank with the posh people anymore. So how does that needle go there? And the story about our seas and our waterways being full of shocking amounts of sewage is sort of bubbling away way down there. Paul's in Hexham in Northumberland. Paul, what would you like to say?
Hi there, yes. I'm a member of Hexham Rowing Club. Last few years, we've noticed a degradation in the quality of the water, but it may not just be linked, because we're lucky. We're in the North Tyne, just next to the Scottish borders, so we don't have big problems, but we've had extremes of high and low waters, which has obviously concentrated everything that has been put in there, and we've had periods where the water has been very polluted.
How can you, but forgive me, and remember some people might be eating a bag of Monster Munch, but how can you tell?
Colour, smell.
So you're out on the, what are you in with the Hexham Rowing Club? Is it big?
Well, it's a multi-use site because there's stand-up paddle boards, kayaks. Okay. We're rowing.
So you're a few people in a big wooden boat.
Big fiberglass thing, right. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So and you're close enough to the water to detect.
2 inches from the water.
Well, that's pretty close.
Or you're in the water, yeah.
That's pretty close. And you can smell it, different from what it would have been, say, 5 years ago.
Yes, it's definitely different from what it was. You can't just point the finger at, say, well, it is pollution, because there has been extremes of low water levels.
Okay.
We sit just under Kielder, so it's just balance.
It's a beautiful part of the world, isn't it? Absolutely beautiful part of the world.
Yeah.
Do you understand what I mean? And you're right. There'll be some, other issues. It's not going to be confined entirely to sewage discharge, but the levels of sewage discharge have gone through the roof in recent years. Do you understand why?
I understand from the point of view that there's economic pressures on the actual companies.
But
themselves.
We're not. But
I don't think they should have been privatised. It makes no sense.
No, it's probably part of it.
We all need water, so why should we be subsidising French pensioners?
Yes, and people pointing out. Well, people often point out things aren't as bad in Scotland. I need a little bit more proof of that. I'm always happy to believe it, but you're pretty near. You're as near as you say, and that might have as much to do with tides as it does with water companies. But of course, Scottish Water isn't, I don't think, privatised, so that might be part of the picture as well. I'm a wild swimmer who chooses not to drive whilst living in rural Gloucestershire. I see Alex is trying to knit together a few of the stories that I have knitted together today. There are no buses. I'm being totally priced out of my hometown, and I'm paranoid every time I throw myself in the River Frome. It sounds like this morning's programme was made for me. Alex, it was entirely. I do this once a year. I do a bespoke radio programme for one listener. I pick 3 subjects that are absolutely dear to the heart of one individual listener and then challenge myself with making it interesting for everybody else. And today it was Alex in Stroud's turn. Congratulations. 24 after 10 is the time. Steve's in Swindon. Steve, what do you reckon?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I had to call in. Last week on Thursday night on social media, I got some messages from some mates at a local lake of mine called Peakmore Lagoon.
Oh, yeah.
There were signs of dead fish floating on the surface.
Well, that's not good.
No, and there was hundreds and hundreds of them.
Oh.
The Environment Agency went down there and started doing testing and said that the oxygen levels in the water had plummeted from where they're supposed to be. I think it's supposed to be like 80 or 90%. They'd gone down to 8%, and all the fish were starting to suffocate.
Good Lord.
And there was bream, roach, pike, everything floating on the surface.
Carp.
Hundreds and hundreds. Yeah, well, the carp, only 2 carp went.
Oh, okay.
So that was a bit more hardy. But there was hundreds of them. And
This isn't going to be sewage, is it?
Well, there's a Thames water treatment plant on the River Ray.
Right.
And last year, apparently, there was a overflow there, and that killed hundreds of fish on the River Ray. The Environment Agency were down there. They had to put aerators in, which luckily have brought the oxygen levels up now. But they've done tests, and they've said that there is an organic pollutant in the water, and we don't know where it's come from yet.
No, I'm just reading about it in the Swindon Advertiser, actually. So there was no dodgy smell, which makes them think it probably wouldn't be sewage. That River Ray possibility has been ruled out, according to the club vice chairman Richard Reeves. But so it could be farming, could it? It could be. I mean, who knows what it could be?
Yeah, I mean,
it couldn't be sabotage. Is it competitive fishing?
No, you have a few old boys doing a competition. But that's about
so it wouldn't be sabotage. It's not like one of those weird stories about people nobbling their rivals' marrow before the annual vegetable show.
No, I don't think any angler would willfully kill hundreds and hundreds of fish to get.
It's grim, isn't it? So it's a horrible business. And you fish there yourself, do you?
Yeah, I have done. Yeah, I live just around the corner from it, but for me, it's an easy walk to go around there. But when you're there,
beautiful looking lake,
and it's just dead fish. I mean, you can go there now, even though the lads have done a really good job in cleaning it up. You can stand on the pegs and you just look in the reeds, and there's just dead perch, roach, just floating there. It's not so disheartening. It really is sad.
We'll have to wait and see. We'll have to keep an eye on that one and find out what happened. But just it adds to the sense that it's not just going to be linked to the sewage. There's other stuff going on as well, because of course runoff from farming and fertilizers is another element of this issue. I'm sort of failing to pin down precisely why it gets my goat so much. It's the fact that it's clearly avoidable. You know, I know that the demonisation of privatisation can be sometimes almost as lazy as the demonisation of anything else. But if you're looking at something and thinking, well, we can either spend the money on that or we can keep it, there needs to be law in place. There needs to be regulations in place that stop you from keeping it. That seems to me to be the most fundamental difference between all these vampiric free marketeers. I don't know if you've seen the story about Liz Truss trying to give out a gong for one per every 4 days she was in office or something like that. And the people who'll get them are the people who say, free market, you must let businesses do whatever they want. And yet, it always seems so obvious to me that governments exist to stop businesses doing from whatever they want. Make a profit, but please make a profit. We're all screwed if you don't make a profit. But those moments where you're looking at something and thinking, well, we can either stop pumping shocking amounts of sewage into that river over there, or we can keep the money ourselves. And they just go, let's keep the money ourselves. I'm almost certainly being a bit simplistic. But anyway, we're stepping a little further into the story than that, if you'll allow, and really wondering how your relationship with water has changed as a consequence of all this pollution. Penny's in Fife, which doesn't really narrow things down. Penny, what would you like to say?
Oh, good morning, James. Lovely to speak to you.
Likewise.
I can talk about two things, really. I can tell you a little bit about the Scottish water situation, but also particularly about Sunderland, because I studied there in the 80s. So on the Scotland front, I mean, I'm a wild swimmer, do a bit of kayaking. The water quality up here, usually it's not too bad. Yeah. I always check it before I go in, because during high rainfall it does deteriorate. And I mean, I have a beck actually that runs at the back of my house, and during COVID there was a horrendous pollution incident. You could smell it, sewage fungus. I mean, someone was saying, how do you know?
Yeah.
When you get a really bad incident, you get this sewage fungus growth that just coats the watercourse.
Oh, gross.
And yeah, it is. It's horrific. So I think we are better here, probably partly because of the lower population level. So
and I think Scottish Water stayed publicly owned as well, didn't it? So
they have and I think that, and there is investment going in. But coming to the Sunderland side, between 85 and 88, I was at Sunderland Polytechnic doing environmental studies.
Oh, blimey.
And one of the things that we used to do as part of the course was you would take water samples from the River Wear and would culture them on the agar plates.
Yes.
To see what grew. And one group who did this, they were so concerned about the bacteria that grew on the plates that they had to incinerate them immediately and get rid of a lot of the equipment because it was such high levels. And you know, swimming in the water and that at the time was questionable. I mean, I had a friend that used to do quite a bit of windsurfing in the in the harbour area of Sunderland, and he was regularly ill with diarrhoea.
And then it got better, though, didn't it?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think what I find really depressing and makes me extremely angry is what's changed.
Yeah.
You know, that was in the 80s, and here we are, 2023. And
either nothing's improved or things have got better and then got worse again. I think with the beaches, often we seem to have gone in reverse. Beaches that were blue are now red, and we know that the levels of effluent being pumped into the waterways have rocketed, but you won't know for each specific case. I just remember the UK having a reputation for having quite dirty beaches when I was a kid, and then it didn't, and now it does again.
Agree. I swam at Redcar as a kid, and you know, there was some very unsavoury things floating around in the water, and then it did get better. But now I wouldn't swim in there at all because there's all this crustacean die-off and everything, which I find very alarming. How's
the back now?
At the back, it's good.
Oh, thank goodness.
It's okay. It's recovered. We had to. We had to get the Scottish. Well, I contacted SEPA about it, and they got Scottish Water out, and it had been a blockage in the sewer on the road that runs near that had caused an overflow into the back. But it was horrific. I mean, you could smell it when you walked out the front door.
That's not good. Especially not if you're trying to sell the place, which thankfully you weren't, I presume, Penny. It is 10:32. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. We're just taking one of our irregular... we're doing our own sort of informal testing of the waters, except you are my Petri dishes. 0345 6060 973 if you want to tell me what's popping up on your algal jelly this morning. It's 10:33. Thomas Watts has your headlines. It is 10:36 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Here's something that you very rarely hear me say on the programme, but I don't know if Brexit is to blame on this occasion. A few of you suggesting to me that there must be some sort of link. Rob says, I think it must be linked to Brexit, James. Maybe we've got less regulation since leaving, so these companies can get away with more outflows. And Karen, who's in Cornwall, says, I am a sea swimmer in West Cornwall and also an underwater photographer. Oh, cool. The water quality is dreadful after rain. There's sewage everywhere. I wonder if the European Bathing Water Directive used to keep this at bay before Brexit. Our local Tory MP stood up in Parliament and explained why it's important to keep pumping it into the sea before voting to continue doing so. His constituency has beaches on 3 sides. It's so depressing. I know Conservative MPs voted against an amendment that would have created a stricter duty on water companies to end dumping sewage into the sea. I think that's probably what you're referring to. There was a relatively small Tory rebellion, but it didn't change the law. It just kept it the same as it had been before, and obviously let the water companies off the hook. I'm very, very, very quick normally to acknowledge when Brexit is to blame for a measurable deterioration in our quality of life in this country. But on this one, I think the status quo, it's more about the Tories keeping things as they were, or keeping the rules the same, perhaps, as the problem grew, than it was actually about Brexit. But I'm open to persuasion on that. That would be a first, wouldn't it? You ringing me to convince me that Brexit is actually to blame for a problem that we're discussing. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call if you want to have a crack at doing that. And someone who knows of what they speak when it comes to triathlons writes, this was the blue ribbon event for British Triathlon, James. Athletes from all over the world come to compete. It's part of the World Triathlon Series. This has undoubtedly impacted the impression of Britain overseas. 10:38 is the time. Jim's in Glasgow. Jim, what would you like to say?
Morning, James. I had the pleasure of staying for a week's holiday last year and this year, not far from Kidderminster. took my mother down to visit my cousin and aunt who come from Grimsby, and they've been angling. My cousin's been angling in that part of the world.
Hang on a minute, mate. It's not the most obvious. I mean, I bow to few people in my affection for the old country, but it's not the most obvious holiday destination in the world.
Well, you see, my mother used to take the train down to meet my aunt.
Oh,
but
lovely.
She's 84 now, so I've taken her down the last couple of years. And while they drink wine and put the world to rights, my cousin and I go fishing.
Oh, lovely.
So this year, my cousin had been fishing for 2 days on the River Team before I arrived.
Yeah.
And once I got there, we did 2 days on the Team and one on the Severn next to the Hope Fleet pub hotel place.
Yes.
Throughout those 3 days, and for the 2 days my cousin fished on his own, not only did we not catch a single fish, but there wasn't even any indication. You know, usually you get a little nibble here and there. And on the third day, he decided to get the waders on to try float fishing.
Right.
And as he was in the river, he was kicking up some sort of brown silt that came off the river. And let's just say it didn't smell of pesticides.
Really?
Or fertiliser.
Sorry, go on.
Yeah, I did some Googling, and there's a site where you can check the discharge levels from local, sewage treatment works. And there's one 5 miles upriver. And last year alone, it was listed as pumping sewage into the River Team for 60 hours.
Good grief. And I mean, it's happening everywhere, isn't it? What? I mean, do you fish at home as well?
No.
It's just what you do it when you're away.
We're like the another version of Whitehouse and Mortimer.
Yeah.
He knows what he's doing, and I make a fool of myself.
Oh, see, so you just join in, you catch up with your cousin, and you have a good chat and that kind of. So that's
beers, and we put the bottle to rights.
Because the team is up. I've got you now. So you were in Droitwich then, were you? You were staying in Droitwich?
No, we were in Martley.
Okay, but the whole fleet. The whole fleet's in.
Along from Martley, there's a place called the Talbot Inn.
Yes.
And my cousin also used to fish there a lot. And there's a bridge over the Team, and he took me there. He said, normally you look over that bridge, you can see barbo, you can see chub,
and it's just not happening. What does he think? Fish. I mean, so crikey, and this is a really good example of what I'm talking about. And I mean, the two worlds collide in a way, because I'm supposed to be a media professional, and I don't know why the story doesn't. If it wasn't for Fergal Sharkey, we probably wouldn't have been talking about it at all. It's strange, exactly. And yet your cousin can sit there and watch something beautiful and bucolic go into free fall, go into hideous decline, and no one really seems to care.
He has never in 35 years had 5 days of fishing where he's never caught a single fish. And just one other thing, James, about the Scottish water.
Yes.
I know somebody who works within Scottish water. And although he didn't tell me it was specifically for Scottish water,
right?
But he said the thing that we need to understand is that to take sewage and to treat it so that it can be discharged or made back into water, it's very energy intensive.
Right.
It takes a lot of electricity. And of course, over the last couple of years, the way that electricity has been going.
Yes.
And he just wonders whether that was one of the underlying reasons why it's easier to dump it than to pay a fortune to treat it properly.
I mean, there was a story as well, wasn't there, about them having difficulty importing some of the chemicals that were needed, that I think was linked to Brexit, but you just don't know. And this is one of those things where the media lets us all down, because, you don't know where to go for the actual facts, and that's why you're left just relying upon the anecdotal evidence of people like your cousin. Well, I'd wonder why it's not a bigger deal. So did your mum enjoy herself in Worcestershire?
We had a great time. We stay in a little wing of a very old mansion.
Where's that then?
In Martley.
Where is Martley? I thought Martley was in the northeast.
No, Martley.
Martley.
M-A-R-T-L-E-Y.
Oh, yes. Okay, right you are.
About 10 miles from Bewdley.
Yes, I was going to say that's out Bewdley way, isn't it? And the river's lovely in Bewdley as well. But
it's beautiful.
It is a lovely part of the world.
When he asked me how we were getting on, I said, 3 days, not a nibble, not a bite.
That's incredible.
Just to placate me, he said, it's always better to fish and catch nothing than to never fish at all.
I like that. I think it was Tennyson, wasn't it, who said it's better to have loved and lost than to have never loved at all. So you've got a bit of Tennyson coming into the fishing there. I think that the place you stayed in, or the place your mum stayed in, I think it was on the market a few years ago, and I remember having a look at it. Not to buy, because I live in London, but I'm always intrigued when fancy mansions come on the market in my old neck of the woods. Thank you, Jim. Martin is in St Asaph in North Wales. Martin, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James. You mentioned before about the difference between England and Scotland.
Yes.
I just wanted to say something about the difference between England and Wales.
Oh, yeah.
New build housing developments in Wales for the last 3 years must have a sustainable drainage system. So I think housing developments of 5 or more houses, along with the sort of planning application, there must be a sustainable drainage system planned. And that essentially separates surface water from foul water. Because what seems to be causing the problem is when it rains, obviously all the water from your roofs and the gutters and runoff from the driveways mixes with the foul water, and it all goes to sewage treatment plants at once, which can't keep up, so it just pumps it straight out. So new builds now in Wales are separating surface water from foul water. They often have these large attenuation buffer ponds on site, which fill up with rainwater and then slowly trickle out, but the foul water goes through it.
So this is what we were talking about. So they have been compelled commercially to spend more money than they would have liked to on improving the quality of life for everybody in the area.
Yeah, I don't know how much more money it costs, but it's just a sustainable way of doing it rather than what we've naturally done. But the problem still exists that all the other houses are still mixing surface water with foul. So I think what they can do about it is, if you take Rhyl, for example, on the north coast of Wales, the River Clwyd comes out at the coast there, and all the sewage treatment is treated just on the coast at Rhyl. If it's been raining, that just pumps out. So instead, you could build underwater holding tanks. So when it rains, you've got so many more 1,000 litres per minute coming down the Clwyd and through the surface water. Those holding tanks could hold it and treat it, and then let it trickle out treated. But you'd have to have much bigger holding capacity, if you like. I think the cost of doing that around the whole country is just prohibitive.
Right.
The other thing you'd have to do is every house, every street currently where surface water and sewage are mixed together, you'd have to somehow separate them so that the surface water can run through unpolluted and the foul water sort of comes through, because the rate at which we poo and take baths won't really change much.
Well, I nearly said that to someone earlier, but I thought I was going to sound a bit stupid. I nearly said I don't think that we're, going more than we used to, are they? So
no, it's because of the rain.
Yes.
It's when it rains, we now have a huge amount of contaminated water heading for the sewage treatment.
Yeah.
Right. So if you separate it, your rate of foul water shouldn't change much.
Oh, I think that's why we've got something in our back garden. We've got I didn't really understand what the builder was talking about, but he wanted to build a massive hole.
Yes.
And put crates in it and then put the lawn back over it. And that's where the water from the drain pipes goes.
A soak away.
That's it. That's what he called it.
Yeah, so it's attenuating. It's essentially now, and I think this is happening with farming too. What's happening with farming is the land is getting, if it's intensively farmed, the land gets sort of compacted.
Yes.
So rainwater doesn't soak into the land and slowly drain into the rivers. It all goes flooding over the top.
So it is. So that's climate change. That's climate change as much as
And people, it's back to beavers as well, isn't it? They're talking beaver dams used to slow the flow of water coming down all the tributaries into the rivers.
I'm in Ealing now, mate. The beavers are back in Ealing.
The
We're doing our
back
bit
to save the day. Maybe
doing our bit in West London. I nearly said something completely inappropriate then, but I stopped myself in the nick of time, Martin. Thank you very much indeed. I like that. So it is about having proper conversations, as opposed to, this ludicrous. We're in such a horrible period of British politics now. The Tories just desperately looking for wedge issues, and Keir Starmer like a night watchman cricketer just blocking everything, and he daren't lift his bat. He barely looks up. Everything's a forward defensive, a backwards defensive, blocking this, blocking that. Whereas really you need to be having quite open and frank conversations about problems that need to be fixed with new solutions, not just resurrection of old solutions. I like that, the difference between surface water and foul water. And if you can reduce the flow of surface water into the sewage system, then you will reduce the amount of overflow of sewage. It's clever. There you go, doing my bit in my back garden. It's 10:48. It is 10:51. The Lionesses are playing, of course, in the World Cup. I don't know whether or not that's going to have impacted upon my audience this morning. They're currently in extra time with the score against Nigeria still at 0-0. I'll tell you if it looks like it's probably going to go to penalties. Unfortunately, the only prescription glasses I have with me today are my Ray-Bans. So, and the screen is quite far away from me in the studio. So, and also the way that the screen is configured means that the subtitles, for some inexplicable reason, are in the top left-hand corner of the screen, which means I can only see the score when the commentators have stopped talking. So I'm currently sitting in my state-of-the-art studio wearing sunglasses, squinting at a screen where, if I'm not quick, oh, they're back again, the subtitles pop up over the score. But so anyway, it's 0-0, and it is now it's the 108th minute, so 90-10. It's the 18th minute of extra time at the moment. So, and we're down to 10. I nearly said men. What would that be like in the sort of great scheme of things? If you watch, because, you've been watching football all your life, and when someone gets sent off, you say they're down to 10 men. It would be a very, very easy mistake to make, wouldn't it? But would it be a cancelable offence? I keep reading about people being cancelled. I normally read about people being cancelled in their own newspaper columns, or hear people talking about being cancelled on their own television programmes, or appearing as guests on national radio. But anyway, presumably there is somebody somewhere who is simultaneously cancelled and not much more famous than they were before they were cancelled. But would you get cancelled for saying I shall check with my very woke colleagues now. If I said England are down to 10 men, would that be a terrible woke faux pas? No, apparently would be all right. But so anyway, England are down to 10 women. And that, of course, will impact. I think we've lost a striker, so that may impact upon penalties as well. 10:53 is the time. Back to the water and the shocking amounts of sewage that have been pumped into it. Yeah, I mean, if you want to be quick, there's a couple of phone lines free. Why isn't it a bigger story? I think of COVID quite often. And one of the reasons I think about COVID professionally rather than personally is because it was something that everybody wanted to talk about every day. All day, every day. 3 hours every day for months on end. All we talked about was COVID. And it was a combination of circumstances, but it's proof that sometimes there can be, I suppose, a war that we're actively involved in would be similar, but not if it's in the Middle East. You're not going to talk about that every day. A war in Europe that we're involved in, would you talk about that every day? So I just often wonder, why is that story not bigger? Why is this story not bigger? I could take any answer you've got on that, and you can even put your tinfoil hat on if you want before you ring in. Richard's in Wigan. Richard, what would you like to say?
Hi, good morning, James.
Hello,
First time caller here.
Welcome.
Yeah, I'm a sea fisherman.
Yeah.
And, I quite regularly fish on the River Mersey in Liverpool, just at the mouth of the Mersey,
yes.
either on Liverpool side or over on the Wirral side.
Right.
Now, the water is quite murky there because it is a tidal river.
Yes.
I can imagine you get a lot of silt. But not just me, there has other fishermen experienced it. We've been retrieving our lines to change our baits and that, and we've actually had tampons and sanitary towels.
Blimey. When did that start?
I've been sea fishing. I started pre-COVID for about 12 months before COVID. And obviously, we all got locked down.
Yeah.
But as far back as that, since I've been sea fishing.
And when did
all the Mersey always has had a bit of a reputation, right? But not
that though. When did you start encountering sanitary products while fishing?
Since I've been sea fishing, really, in the past 4 to 5 years.
Oh, I see what you mean.
I know it's gone a lot worse to what it was. It's gone a lot worse.
And what do you talk about when you're with your fellow fishermen and women? When you talk about this, what are the reasons that you come up with? What do you sort of acknowledge it as?
Obviously, I think it's sewage discharge. It's got to be untreated sewage discharge. Because
it must
if it
be
was treated. You won't be finding these things. I have heard it on a story of blokes finding condoms as well on the lines.
Yeah, well, that way. I mean, again, the one would go with the other, really. Anything that gets flushed down the toilet is likely to. You can stop ambushing me with slightly unexpected words now, please, Richard.
Yeah,
stop dropping things into the conversation that are making me slightly uneasy.
But what you usually find when it's happening, like the tides go off the moon, and like at this time of year there's a big moon, so you get big tides. And it seems to happen when there's big tides, so that tells me there's discharging sewage when it's big tides, so it gets it out quick.
Or that it's refreshing part. I mean, I saw some amazing footage from a beach I know really well in Norfolk last week, where the water had come all the way up to the wooden steps, and normally you can't see the sea from the wooden steps. And then in Chiswick, where you get the kayaks going past the pub window. because it's come up onto the towpath. But yeah, you're right. So when the tide is high, I sound like Blondie now. When the tide is high, there's
you're going to get it.
But what I was trying to push at is that the lads who've been doing it for decades.
Yeah.
And you say, why is it worse now?
That was never. It was never like that at one point. It's always been a bit of a dirty and a murky river. Like,
of course, it's a big industrial. It's a port, isn't it? I mean, there's all sorts of.
Yes, of course. Like you heard about chemicals going in the water years ago and stuff. But recently, sanitary products you're finding a lot wrapped around your line.
And it's just incredible. We all just sit here talking about it. It's one of those phone-ins that the switchboard's got busier and busier and busier as it's gone on. Because we're all sort of going, well, actually, no, this isn't normal. I will give them a ring after all. Because, I wonder why it's not a bigger story. Thank you, Richard. A sparkling debut from Richard the Sea Fisherman. Martin's in Bushy. Martin, what would you like to say?
Good morning. The problem with the sewage dumping is a Brexit benefit.
Well, not another one. Honestly, I can't keep count. I can't keep track of them all, Martin. It's incredible.
On the 7th of September 2021, the government issued a directive saying that the water companies are allowed to dump sewage at will.
Yes, I remember that. But do we know that that's still in place?
It's in place until 2050.
Are you
told to clean up their act before 2050?
So the Environment Agency said some plants may not be able to meet conditions governing the quality of wastewater released into groundwater or surface water due to supply shortages linked to Brexit and the pandemic. So the rule might still be in place, but we don't know, Martin, and I don't know how familiar you are with this programme, but we are not backwards in coming forwards when it comes to blaming Brexit.
I'm very familiar.
Well, then you will know that I don't, but we don't know for sure that the shortages are still in place, do we? In fact, they're probably not.
No, we don't. They're probably not, but you can see that probably the water companies got into the habit of not buying it or trying to buy it.
Or just a precedent was set and it was like, well, we don't have to worry too much about it now because we're not going to get into trouble if we do it.
Yeah, let's put the money back in the pockets of the benefactors.
The shareholders and the executives. Thank you, Martin. Thank you for the detail on that as well. He's absolutely right. 7th of September 2021. I wanted to squeeze in Angela because Angela is in Morecambe Bay and I could do my story. I've got a story about... Do you remember my story about Angela? Do you know my story about Morecambe?
No, I don't.
I've got two stories about Morecambe. One is, and I don't think I've shared this one on the radio before, but Mum's listening today, so she'll be able to confirm, that we once blocked the hotel toilets in Morecambe with disposable nappies, which is quite apt, given the conversation that's under discussion. And when I started at private school, Angela, we'd just been to Morecambe for a holiday. And I came home and I told my dad everyone was talking about where they'd been on holiday, and they'd been to places like Barbados and Saint-Tropez, and we'd been to Morecambe. So my dad said, tell everyone you went to Moricambi. So I went to school the next day, and the teacher was there, where did you go for your holidays? And I went, we went to Moricambi. And I said it in an Italian accent, and no one knew what the hell I was talking about. But that's not what you rang in for, Angela. What did you ring in for?
No, it's a bit pooey than that.
Oh, dear.
Yeah, so I live in the Morecambe area. So,
yes.
I live in Heysham, actually, right near the sea.
Yes.
And there's a really big swimming community, sort of called the Mallows.
Oh, lovely.
Which is right on the bay, opposite the Winter Gardens. And they go out all the time. I'm 51, so I've been swimming in the sea all my life, and rivers in the area, and the Lake District as well.
Yeah.
And I've been hearing...
Oh, it's a terrible phone line, Angela. I'm going to have to push you to the punchline.
Yeah. Well, basically, what I would say is that there's a number of things that are causing this. Sewage, chicken farms, runoff from farms, climate change, because of increased rainfall coming off tarmac.
Of course it is. People who've got less. I mean, even something like paving over your front garden contributes to this because the water doesn't soak into the ground. Instead, it makes its way into the gutters, and the gutters feed into the sewers, and suddenly the volume of diluted sewage is much greater. I'm moving on, Angela. Not for any reason other than the fact that the phone line just wasn't quite up to sniff there, for which no one is responsible. It is 1 minute after 11. 5 minutes after 11 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The funny thing about conspiracy theories is that they normally have a little nugget. There's normally something from which the castles in the air are built. So I don't know how familiar you are. I keep an eye on them because there's a sort of threshold at which I think we have a responsibility to start diffusing some of the nonsense. I really felt this during COVID, actually, when you got your vaccine weirdos doing genuine harm. And there's a poor woman in Ireland who's having to sue a weird sort of fake news paper for putting it about that her son was killed by the vaccine. And she's so distressed and disturbed by this. She's taking legal action. And someone sent me one of these newspapers. A listener sent me one of these newspapers in because they couldn't believe it had been put through their letterbox. So obviously there's money to be made. Whatever the grift, there's always... Well, look, where there's grift, there's cash, as we know. But I mention it because you can't completely ignore it. There comes a point where if enough people believe something harmful, vaccines are a wonderful example. So if enough people believe nonsense about vaccines, then the take-up rate gets affected and it affects herd immunity. So measles, for example, coming back. I think there was a story recently about a country that had managed to eradicate one of the MMRs. I forget which one it was. And a British kid on holiday who hadn't been vaccinated managed to reintroduce this condition to an entire country that a few years previously had celebrated its actual eradication. Would be a much better story, this, if I could remember A, the country, and B, the disease, wouldn't it? But hey-ho, it's pretty good that I managed to dredge it up from somewhere. And besides, this is very much it's a crowdsourced entertainment, this programme. So in any minute now, someone will drop the details of the story that I've just very vaguely referred to, and I'll either have to apologise and withdraw or pat myself on the back for remembering something very relevant without being fully au fait with the precise details. Full time now in the football, so we're off to penalties in the World Cup. The Lionesses now moving to penalties, so I keep it. You'll be able to tell. Am I going to be able to do that if I put my glasses back on? I'll be doing something like, "Oh, so Doris, tell me more about your bunions." Oh my God, she scored! Can we do that? Would that work as radio? I've just put my shades back on, so I'm looking completely normal now, sitting in the studio, glancing at the screen. About the penalties are about. Can I conduct a normal radio phone-in while also watching a penalty shootout? Do you think? Would you be able to? I mean, my chair is slightly wrongly angled, which doesn't help. I don't know. We'll find out shortly. But what am I on about now? The conspiracy theory. One of the new ones that's doing the rounds is that the government is trying to abolish money so that we will all be sheeple. And the nugget of truth that lies behind this conspiracy theory is the fact that the government is embarked upon a digital transformation in public services. In particular, it is more efficient and, a one-stop shop, a one-size-fits-all solution obviously saves money. So in at least 75 public services, the government has, and I quote, ambitions for widespread digital transformation, which essentially means that you'll be doing everything online, including paying. So the conversation about being digitally isolated, digitally excluded is the phrase that you need to be aware of. The conversation about being digitally excluded is not the same as a conversation about an increasingly cashless society, but there are points of intersection. And one of the key points of intersection for me was news last year from Citizens Advice that 1 million people had disconnected their broadband during the cost of living crisis. They simply could not afford to be on broadband anymore. Okay? Now, factor into this conversation the very simple statistic that about 9 out of 10 of all jobs are now advertised only on the internet. So who is likely to be most in need of a new job or a job at all? Is it the people who've got broadband at home or the people who've cancelled their broadband because they can't afford to pay for it? Yeah, thank you. No prizes for getting that one right. You look at this and you begin to recognise why digital exclusion is something that we should be talking about, while some of the ludicrous examples of 15-minute cities and cashless societies are categorically not things that anybody sensible should be talking about. So you and me probably find the convenience of cashless transactions, cashless parking, key services, everything you can do these days without cash quite nice. I don't like having cash in my pocket, but for millions of people who find it difficult to carry out basic day-to-day functions in a world that assumes everyone is comfortable online, you've got an issue here. You've got an issue. So I'm going to try and do both elements of the same story while watching a live penalty shootout. So this should be good. The number you need, as always, is 0345 60 60973. I don't want to do a sort of is there anybody old out there feeling poorly type of phone in. Because I think if I say, why does anyone still need cash? I already know all of the answers to that question. But why does anybody still need cash? Apart from perhaps playing a little bit fast and loose with Her Majesty's Revenue and His Majesty's Revenue and Customs, cash transactions are largely pointless. And yet there's a till in my Morrison's, there's a self-service till in my local supermarket that is cash only. There's about half a dozen that are card only, and there's one that is still cash only. So why would people still need to use cash? But more interestingly, I think, do you remember that time I nearly did a phone-in about people who haven't got any phones? Do you remember that? I read a story, it's about 10 years ago, I read a story in the newspaper about the number of people who still didn't have a phone. And I said, I got halfway through saying, give me a ring if you haven't got a phone. It was one of my finest moments as a radio broadcaster. Obviously, for anyone not quite keeping up at the back, you can't ring me if you haven't got a phone. So you'll never be able to do a radio phone-in. Possibly the only radio phone-in you could never do is a radio phone-in about what it's like not to have a phone. But if you are digitally excluded, you would still be able to ring me. I've just got a feeling that it's just less likely that it would happen. What I want is an example that is probably being overlooked currently, of the downside to what the rest of us see as a more efficient and convenient way of living and interacting and paying. So when I mentioned 75 public services a minute ago, imagine if you are trying to sort out your housing benefit or your council tax or a blue badge application and you've not got internet. What are you going to do? Imagine if you've got a customer service issue. So, even if I want to cancel, I get these weird little stones delivered to put in the dog's water bowl so that when she wheezes in the garden, it doesn't kill the patch. I'm going to get messages now saying, oh my God, don't give your dog those water. But it really works. Do you know what happens with but instead of getting little patches of dead grass all over the lawn, you get little patches of extra green grass. It's the strangest thing. So it must just slightly reduce the nitrogen level that's coming out in the wee, because nitrogen is a fertiliser, but if you've got too much of it, it will kill the grass. So I put these stones in her water bowl and I signed up for a monthly subscription. But if I want to cancel it or postpone it because we're going on holiday or whatever it might be, you can only do it interactively. So what do you do if you're digitally excluded? You can't. And that's a relatively trivial example, but if I needed to sort out my blue badge application or a council tax rebate, I would have, I don't know, I genuinely don't know what I would do. It's not as if there are internet cafes anymore. Is there? So there's two conversations here. One might be a bit silly, and one, I think we've just missed a flipping penalty, haven't we? Oh, I knew this was going to happen. First England penalty, complete miss. Oh dear, shanked it wide. It's 14 minutes after 11. There's two conversations here. One might be a bit silly about the cash thing. I kind of, well, look, the bottom line is it's not something I think about. I occasionally come across conversations about cashlessness, and I do remember old-fashioned radio phone-ins about why does anyone still need cash anymore, or give me a ring if you tell me about the last time you bought a stamp, or tell me about the last time you used a bank, and I just find them quite spectacularly dull. But there's an editorial in The Guardian today that just managed to help me see the story in a slightly more alive way. From GP appointments to railway tickets to cashless parking, key services in the UK are being delivered digitally. And for some people, this is actually a disaster. If you are one of them, give me a call on 0345 60 60973, okay? And then that's the more serious conversation. The sillier conversation, I think, is why do we need... Yeah, actually, no, let's do it philosophically as well as behaviourally. Why do we need cash? Why do people get their knickers in a twist about the declining cash? Did I see Jeremy Corbyn's brother on social media the other day? Going into a shop that's card only and filming himself paying with coins. I think I did. That's two things that I've filed away somewhere in my memory banks that I can't fully remember. British kid unvaccinated goes on holiday and manages to reintroduce a disease to a country that had previously eradicated it. And Jeremy Corbyn's strange brother marching into a shop where it's card-only transactions and insisting on being able to pay with coins. It's 11:15. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need if you want to contribute to either of these conversations. It's 11:15. It is 18 minutes after 11, and I've completely failed to conduct a live national radio phone-in while also watching a penalty shootout. I think it's 2-1 to England now, and we went first as well. Are you sure, Mikey? Because I've got the subtitles covering the score. This is ridiculous. Do you know how much this studio cost? Millions of pounds, and I can't see. So it's not over just yet. But England are doing pretty well. I think we've scored 2 out of 3, and they've scored 1 out of 3. Is that right? Does that sound right? I'm sorry. This is so unprofessional. I'm going to take my shades off and continue with the phone in. Ross is in Camden. Ross, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thank you for having me on. I just want to point out that cash is very good as a business owner. So we've got a small candle shop in Camden Market.
Is it called Camden Candles?
No, it's
Why
not.
not?
It's called Gem Sense Candles.
Called what? Goal! Goal! We scored a goal! Yay! Sorry, carry on.
That's all right. So when people come in and they give me cash, they give me £20.
Yes.
And it stays as £20. If someone comes in and pays on a card, I get £19.60 because the card company skim off the top.
Is that still the case?
Yeah, that's the case. So if everyone always uses cards, that £20 eventually dwindles down to nothing because the banks have skimmed it all away at some point or another, and it's being subsidised by more of your money.
Well, then explain to me why increasingly I encounter companies that are card only.
I think that's a security thing for owners. If you don't trust your staff or whatever, and
it's not.
Also,
I mean, as a customer, it's just convenient. But I suppose you'll say, well, it can't be. It's no more convenient than having both cash and card.
It's less convenient than having both. Yeah. So sometimes I get people coming who want to pay cash.
But we'll find out why so many card-only places exist. I mean, restaurants, pubs, I've seen that are card-only, all sorts of places that are card-only. So it's a simple answer to the question. You save a few pence every time someone pays cash. Is there any downside to it? I mean, you physically... I don't suppose you need to go to the bank anymore, do you? Because it sort of operates as a float, and someone else comes in next week and they need change, or tomorrow.
I can take it in and I can pay it in, and you can take your card to basically any post office, most banks. You can just go and pay your cash in to use it. And
hang on, mate. I think this is the penalty. Does this one put us through? Yes. No. Is that put us through? I can't. Yes, I think there we go. Carry on. We're through. The Lionesses are through to the next round of the World Cup. England have gone through. It was Kelly that scored the decisive goal. Then I'm a bit confused about why people are doing cash only. Remember, digital exclusion is the grown-up part of this conversation as well, not just the cash question, which I think probably would be less interesting, but we'll find out. 21 minutes after 11 is the time. Debbie's on the Isle of Wight. Hello, Debbie.
Hello, James. I would just like to say I think, answer two of your questions.
Marvellous.
Using digital stuff, I am partially sighted.
Oh, yes.
And I'm afraid if I try to do cash transfers on the screen, I could very easily get a 3, an 8 and a 5, for instance, muddled up.
Yes.
So if I'm doing any large transfers,
yes,
i.e. when I bought my house, I get the bank to do it. And a small phone screen to me is almost impossible. At home, I have a large screen.
Of course.
Now, and cash, I know exactly what's coming in my pensions every month, and I know exactly what's going out in council tax and all of that. I can then take out in cash X amount at the beginning of the week, and I know exactly how much money I've got. Now, if I start tapping screens for £2 here and £5 there and £7 there, I lose track. And I can't read all the receipts.
No, I completely understand that. How harder is your life getting harder?
Yes, it certainly is. And not just me. I mean, I talk to people a lot. And our older people are finding this assumption that we can all use apps and everything very, very difficult to cope with. It really is. It puts you off doing a lot.
I suppose I have to be very sensitive, Debbie, because, A, it's very important to be sensitive, but B, I want to be respectful of you and of your condition. But are we looking at, do you sound a bit like a blacksmith after cars were invented?
Probably. Yes. I mean, I agree, and I can see why it is, very useful for a lot of people.
Yes.
And I do use it to an extent. Of course I do, but certainly a lot of. I'm living on the Isle of Wight, which is a very elderly population, and I travel by bus everywhere and chat away to people on the bus, and a lot of elderly people really struggle with
it's interesting.
Technology.
And the reason I mentioned blacksmiths is I wonder whether the direction of traffic is essentially saying, well, tough, the generations coming up behind you will be sufficiently au fait with the technology to ensure that these problems don't exist. I mean, I guess that is it. Is it what would be the best example? Not so much I suppose if you can't, there's things that you cannot do unless you do them online. And while you can go online and you can get online, you're not as comfortable online as you would be if your eyesight was tickety boo.
No. I mean, wherever possible, I simply go up and talk to people. I'm having a very interesting conversation with British Gas. I'm on the phone for an hour and a half every Monday morning to British Gas.
Yes.
And eventually I get to speak to somebody, and that's the only way I'm actually
it's a
getting
nightmare,
anywhere.
Of course it is.
But I mean, that's the only way I do it, is I either speak to people, I go in and I actually speak to the person at the council or something I need to talk to, or I just, phone people up. But,
and yes, you have to do it in the sort of face-to-face or mouth-to-ear way. Thank you, Debbie, because I think that the disability angle is not something that I can or should file under, predictable and inevitable. That is something that these companies absolutely should be addressing. Basic accessibility. It's another example of something that companies should be compelled to pay for. So, as we talked about several times with the water, you give a company a choice between doing something that would be for the general good or keeping the money themselves. They're always going to keep the money themselves unless they're compelled to spend that money on the general good, and putting things in place for people like Debbie. It should be part of that social contract. Whether or not it delays the essential redundancy of cash, I don't know, or whether the redundancy of cash, as a first caller from the candle shop in Camden suggested, is an undesirable destination. I genuinely don't know. Jim says I was confusing farriers with blacksmiths. It wouldn't be the first time, Jim. And so then the question, from a commercial point of view, leaving aside they want to put microchips in your head and control you using 5G phone masts, leaving all those people aside, what is the commercial attraction of pushing everyone onto cards and creating a cashless marketplace? Is it solely the fact that they make more money that way? Because then my natural instincts would be to become a little bit opposed to it, I think. It was a French boy, thank you to everyone who got in touch, it was an unvaccinated French boy who went to Costa Rica with his family and reintroduced measles to Costa Rica 5 years after the country had eradicated it. So no native of Costa Rica had contracted the measles for 5 years, and then an unvaccinated French boy, so that would be, getting their medical advice from their Uncle Pierre's Facebook page, went to Costa Rica and reintroduced it to the whole country. Daniel's in Gateshead. Daniel, what would you like to say?
Hiya, James.
Hello.
I feel like I'm in a bit of a unique situation to kind of answer a lot of these questions.
Go on, then.
Up to 4.5 months ago, I worked for Apple.
Yes.
And then 3.5 months ago, I left Apple to open up my own coffee shop in Saltwell Park, which is card only.
You are, yes, you are superbly well qualified. So it depends what you were doing at Apple, doesn't it?
So I was what you call a technical expert. I worked at the Genius Bar, so really big part of my job was around education.
Yes.
So really big part of that was around kind of online security, etc., and privacy, but also around things like Apple Pay, Google Pay, all those sorts of things, right? And what I learned from Apple is just a lot of people don't kind of understand and trust the technologies behind it. They don't really understand that actually things like Apple Pay are far, far, far safer than using your actual bank card. There's a bunch of reasons behind that, biometric verification, tokenization, etc. But then in the coffee shop, what's really interesting, right, is...
Go on. Well, actually, slow down. From the top, when you decided to open a coffee shop in Saltwell Park, what prompted you to make it card only from the get-go?
So a lot of people don't really understand the costs involved around dealing with cash. So as a business owner, a lot of business accounts you have to pay for. The more you pay for per month, the more allowance you get for depositing cash.
Okay,
anything above that amount, you have to pay a percentage.
Right.
So if you think about it, right, so if I was, say, on a really busy Saturday, I've got a whole bag of cash at the end of the day, there's a security issue, so I'd have to take a whole bag of cash out of my coffee shop in the middle of a dark park with no lighting, in the middle of winter. I'd have to then go to the bank, deposit that, but then the bank then has to sort all that cash out. That's the reason why they then have to charge for it, because they have to handle it, they have to count it, they have to move it around. There's a whole bunch of other things that people don't necessarily kind of think about.
But you pay a small commission on every card transaction, do you?
Exactly. So I use. Am I allowed to say what I use? Does that make a difference? Anyway,
yeah, go on, fill your boots.
Yeah, so I use Zettel, so you get Square. There's a whole bunch of different ones. I pay 1.5% per transaction.
Okay.
Right? So it's a small amount, but you would have to pay a percentage no matter what you do, because there's a handling fee. It doesn't matter if it's handling cash, handling card payment, whatever it may be.
So why then? So you calculated that it would actually be more efficient for you to not take any cash at all? Because I thought, speaking to the chap in the candle shop, it seemed to me to be... I'd have thought surely it makes more sense to offer both options, but you...
No, because the fact of the matter is, there's a whole... Let's just say I didn't go to the bank every single day. I would have to have a safe installed here in the coffee shop.
Oh,
That's a whole additional extra cost. If I wasn't taking the cash to the bank, I would have to then get a security company to come collect the cash for me, right? There's a whole bunch of other different bits and bobs, and then there's also the time it would take for me to then go to the bank, etc. And then there's the amount percentage of what I deposit and then gets taken anyway, which actually is higher than 1.5%.
I think if I was opening a business now, I probably would be following your lead. I'm not sure. What's the downside? Whatance the downside?
So yesterday, for example, I had 3 people who didn't buy anything because they
only wanted cash,
right?
Yes.
But at the end of the day,
it wasn't Jeremy Corbyn's brother, was it?
No, right. But and like it's funny because the people that kick off about me being card only are always the same kind of people.
I don't want you to lose any customers, but what do you mean by that?
Whatever. But anyway,
don't worry.
People
I think
people that tend to get angry about things anyway, right?
Yes.
It's just no different, right?
Yes.
So, but I've helped this week alone. I've helped 5 customers add their cards onto Apple Pay, things like that, because I'm in the unique position to be able to...
You can do a little bit of genius barring while you're also... But do you know what you are? Do you know what you are, Daniel?
What's that?
You're a genius barista. You can have that for nothing, mate. That's superb. What's the name of the coffee shop in Saltwell Park? Because there's a couple...
It's called Prism Coffee.
I'm looking at it now. You're not open until 8 o'clock tomorrow morning.
I'm not. No, I'm closed because I'm still quite new. I'm still hiring staff and whatnot. But I hope to open on Mondays as of the end of September.
Yeah, it looks lovely, mate. Congratulations and good luck
Thank you
as
very
well.
much.
Yeah, and you'll be using Genius Barista, will you, in all your marketing work?
We'll see.
It's 32 minutes after 11. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines. I'd say Saltwell Park's a lovely spot as well. I don't know Gateshead at all. I don't know. It's not on my list either for the book tour, which I will be showing with Daniel. I think I'm just looking at a picture of Daniel now, I think, on the sort of Google Maps page. Best of luck to him. I don't think Gateshead's on my book tour. I should be finished with the book by the end of the week. You'll be delighted to hear. This time next week, you will detect a lightness in my tone. You'll detect a sort of almost a demob happy type sensation. I'll be even more giddy and excitable than I am already. There'll be a levity to proceedings that will refresh parts that other radio programmes, even presented by me, have never previously managed to refresh. And then I'll start mercilessly plugging it. So you've got that to look forward to. Not just the book, How They Broke Britain, but also the tour. I think I've got about 10 destinations on the schedule. You can get all the details from my Twitter or X, as they call it these days, or my or Threads or whatever it is, but also by listening to There are an awful lot of love for Daniel's giggle there as well towards the end. Quite a few of you say, can I have it as a ringtone? 11:37 is the time. The cashlessness bothers me. This story is important, more important than I realised at 11 o'clock, because being digitally excluded, whether you're a partially sighted lady on the Isle of Wight or whether you're somebody who has had to turn off their broadband because of the cost of living crisis and is somehow compelled to navigate the fact that 9 jobs out of every 10 now are only advertised online. And if you want to go to the library, you're going to have to probably take public transport to get there. So, I think this is a story about margins and if you like, the symbiotic relationship between government and business combining to just ignore the people in the margins. And I don't know how you reverse that process. I don't know how you ensure that the people in the margins are protected, because you can't spend 2 hours on the phone or 2 hours online waiting to actually communicate with a human being, except you have to. Gabby's in Brighton. Gabby, what made you pick up the phone?
Hello, James.
Hello,
Good morning.
Hello.
This is perfect for me. Another caller that this is perfect for.
Go on.
And by the way, I'm coming to see you at Union Chapel.
Fantastic. I'll see you there. What night is that? Can you remember?
I can't without looking it up.
It's me. It's my gig. I should really know, shouldn't I? Carry on.
Yeah, you should. My brother and I lost our mother, who was our last parent, about a year ago. And my brother doesn't have a mobile phone or the internet, doesn't go on the computer. And it just struck me how difficult everything was once my mother had died, down to probate, council tax, all the government help is online.
But what would the alternative have been? If he hasn't got a phone or the internet, what would he have done in the olden days? Sent a pigeon?
Well, exactly. I presume it would have been a lot of legwork, going to the borough council, going to... I'm not sure.
I remember when Dad died, my sister and I had to do a couple of things in person, but I could just about imagine doing it without the internet, but doing it without a phone. Can I ask why, without being nosy, why your brother chooses not to have a phone or an internet connection?
He has one in the house for the TV, for YouTube, etc. It's his choice. He just doesn't want to carry one. I have tried, because it makes it easier if you're agreeing to meet someone.
Well, doesn't it just?
For them just to have a mobile phone to say, I'll see you at Clapham Junction.
Doesn't fancy it. But he's digitally excluded by choice then?
Yes, to be fair, yes, he is. And I don't mind doing everything because, he's my brother and that's his choice. But I was saying to your producer, it's the little things. It's like, he's just over the river from you, actually. He's in Kew. But, like, everything was in my mum's name, so Kew Gardens membership, that kind of thing. And everything is online, even loyalty cards. You can't swap. Utilities are a nightmare. And, of course, they will either, once you've gone online to book the appointment for the service, etc., they then say, we'll text you and let you know.
And
I'm forever ringing him to say, so-and-so have texted, they'll be there between 8 and 12.
See, what you've done is you've made a case for you. Your brother probably wouldn't be able to live in the way that he lives if he didn't have such a lovely sister, would he? But if we imagine him being in the situation that he's in through necessity rather than choice, you're highlighting all sorts of issues that are. I mean, that's problematic. That's why I said the margins. It's people in the margin. Most people living in the margin that we're talking about will not have any choice in the matter, and that's why it's so interesting to hear what it's like. Does he not? I mean, this isn't very good, Gabby, because I'm now more curious. No, well, I'm now more curious about your brother's lifestyle choices than I am about the broader subject under discussion. So I'm sort of thinking, what if he wants to go to a football game or something like that? Or are you booking in advance? Or does he have a computer at home? Or does he just have the broadband for the telly?
Just has the broadband for the telly. So, doesn't have a computer. He doesn't actually go to football.
No, obviously. What about a railway?
Drive,
what about a train ticket?
He'll go to the station and buy one.
Not for much longer, he won't, because they're closing all the ticket
offices. That's a completely... I was almost going to ring in on that topic because... Oh, I won't go there. I could rant.
Well, it's the same topic, I think. It's a bit, it's I don't know what the phrase is, just to describe. It's a form of utilitarianism, because you're thinking, oh, don't be daft. 95% of people never go near a ticket office in their life. And you're like, yeah, but the 5% who do, what the hell is going to happen to them?
And we're both in our 60s, but I wouldn't go in this day and age. That's not old.
No, of course not.
To the imagination.
You're telling me.
And he does very well. He goes around. He's got his card and etc. for travel.
Yeah.
But as I say, he doesn't drive, and he's quite happy. Just relying on looking at stuff on the telly. But he just doesn't want to engage.
No, I understand that. I'm surprised he hasn't got like a secret one, an emergency one for when he's got. But I get it, and that is digital exclusion, whether it's by choice or design. It's on the 7th, Gabby. I'll see you on November the 7th.
Say hello.
Yes, no, absolutely. I mean, it'd be no point doing it if I didn't get to meet everybody. I look forward to that. And thank you to James as well, who's also coming on the 7th, for getting in touch to remind me where it is that I will be, when it is that I will be doing my book event at the Union Chapel in London. Where's the Union Chapel? Do you know where it is? A lovely part of town. 11:44 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. This is a big deal, but what do you do? Now that you're thinking about it, we didn't do a phone-in on the railway ticket offices, because of this dichotomy, because of this problem. You say, well, look, here are some people who really need it. What are we saying to them as a society? Are we saying tough? I think we are. Also, the efficiency of online treatment is suboptimal, but I presume you want to change. What if you're operating on very tight margins and you need to change your ticket, but you haven't got enough money in your bank account to pay for the second ticket, and then just sit tight until you get the refund on the first ticket? There's so many things that fall into this category. I think it also, speaking of categories, this is something else I have to file under the things. It's my job to make these conversations more interesting and more urgent than they may initially appear. Because this is awful. The statistic that really hit me was the one about the million people who've turned off their broadband because of the cost of living crisis at a point in history where 9 out of 10 new jobs are advertised on the internet. I know you can use some of the data on your phone and what have you, but my goodness me, that's a real pincer movement, that, isn't it? That's a really nasty scenario. And I suspect that it's going to become more common as we move forward rather than less. It's 11:45. I wonder how worried you would be if you were in this situation. I mean, what was the first thing that made me realise? Oh, it was meter keys, where you have to go to the local shop and charge up your key for your electricity meter, and you actually pay more for your electricity than people who have it on direct debit or have it on a more convenient setup. And that just seems to me to be emblematic of something really rotten. You're on a key often because you are vulnerable, or you may have struggled to pay your bill in the past. So I understand why you might have a key, okay? But why you would then pay more? Well, we've got to pay for the key. We've got to pay the shopkeeper needs to make a few pence. So you just surely just dilute it into the customer base so that whatever the extra cost is of operating a key-based system, it's absorbed by every customer. Instead, you have the poorest people, the poorest parts of the clientele paying more for the service than the wealthiest parts of the clientele. It just seems to be in direct contradiction of natural justice. Never mind common sense. And it happens a lot. So now you're looking at the people who are most likely to need a service being the ones who are going to be least likely to be able to access it. And it's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And I don't think it gets filed under, moaning minis or old people resisting technology or modernity. It's what happens when everybody is viewed as a widget. And we're going to account for 95 to 99% of the society, and everyone who's excluded from that group is, frankly, just in the hard cheddar. Or it might be 80%. Think of it in the context of railways, tube stations. I need to speak to somebody. You can now speak to somebody, but you can't buy a ticket. They'll come and help you operate the ticket machine, which is an improvement, but they want to get rid of everybody. Well, I never used a guard on the tube. No, but if you were in a wheelchair, you blooming well would. Or if you just had been a victim of crime, if you were taken ill on a train. It's just like, you know what it is, don't you? It's blooming gully suckers again. You know why I talk about gully suckers? One of the first lessons I learned on LBC, we were talking oddly about floods. But of a different kind. We say, why do you get more floods now? You get more flooded roads than you used to. And someone rang in and said, gully suckers. I said, pardon? They said, gully suckers. The engines that councils, some still have, but some don't, that would essentially clean the gutters. So they'd put signs up the night before. Everyone would have to move their car and put it somewhere else. And the gully sucker would drive down and it would go to the gutters, grills, and just sort of go like this. And clean them out, which meant that next time there was a lot of rain, it just all flowed out very easily. But if you were trying to cut your council budget and you're only using the gully suckers, I don't know, once a month or 10 times a year, you're going to get rid of the gully suckers like the snow ploughs. But then it snows and the country grinds to a standstill. Or then it rains and everywhere floods. Yeah, but we've saved money on gully suckers. So, leaves as well. Sorry, I've gone a bit middle-aged, but let me get this one out of the way. Leaves as well. So we're going to save some money by not cleaning up the leaves on the pavements, right? And then people break their hips and sue the council. And I don't know, but the idea that you've saved money is probably going to be moving into retreat. So that's what digital exclusion does. What does cashlessness do? Alex is in Finchley. Alex, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Good afternoon. How are you doing? Right. This is a really, really big topic, but I'm just from the angle of an accountant. I'm an accountant.
Yes.
I work with a lot of small businesses and charities and individuals. And as my clients are getting older, obviously some of the older clients are finding it hard to pay for things.
Yes.
So, they come to the trusted people, family members and accountants. So all the time, how do I set up this account? How do I apply for this? How do I register for this? So you're doing more than just doing accounting. You basically...
What would they have done previously? What are the changes that people struggle with, Alex?
Well, digital, kind of exploding revolution. You're saying,
what would they have done before? Just got a paper bill and sent a check or something like that?
Yeah, paper bill, banks being open, post offices taking...
Go into the bank, obviously, is a big thing that you can't really do anymore.
Look at the high streets around us. Everything's become a coffee shop now. Now, if you're lucky, some of the post office agents they're setting up, the post office, I don't know what you call them, but they allow you to pay. But now it's only exclusive to businesses. So, you end up kind of giving money to your family members to pay it on your behalf.
So socially speaking, is it a good thing or a bad thing, given that people will rise to the challenge? They will navigate the new requirements.
So yes, socially speaking, it's leaving a lot of people frustrated and behind. And also kind of even prone to being cut off their services. And then also, if they're at risk of trusting the wrong person to get their affairs in order. Yeah. Now, one of the things I've been trying to work with is one of the charities, Alzheimer's Society and Age UK, to say, look, there is an audience here. There is people who need help. Whether you have drop-in sessions where you have someone like myself or some other people who are being vetted and trusted to go in and have like an open workshop. Like have Silver Surfers workshops where they teach them how to go online and do things online. That kind of thing to help people kind of not be so scared about entering their credit card details somewhere. This is what we have. There's one of the charities I work with. The trustees keep saying we have to go digital, we have to go online payment, and I'm with me saying, well, hold on a second. You got members who've been members for about 40 years, and they still want to pay by check. Just because it's expensive for you to do the banking doesn't mean you have to exclude them.
There's a gradation of concern here, isn't there? There are some things where you could say, well, come on, video didn't kill the radio star. You're just going to have to crack on with it and get with the program. But there are other areas where it is actually unfair and unreasonable to reduce people, to restrict people to the new modes of communication because they can't navigate them without help. And as you say, most people might think that putting their card details into their phone is a crazy thing to do, but it would be safer than some of the previous techniques as well. I love this last line of the Guardian editorial today, Alex. It just says, with every year, it seems that Britain is, by design, slowly isolating technically less adept groups. Being unable to claim benefits or to speak to customer services because of a lack of computing know-how is unjust. On the grounds of fairness and inclusion, it cannot be allowed to continue. And I think that's just correct.
Yeah, it is that. It is just to go with what they think is the majority and let the minority be looked after by relatives.
Or not looked after at all, out of sight, out of sight, out of mind. I hadn't thought of. Thank you for what you're doing as well with individual clients, but also with charities as well. I don't know whether or not I should apologise for not being a little bit clearer on what an issue this was earlier, but I am now, so better late than never. Thank you, Alex. Ruben's in Liverpool. Ruben, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome.
On the digital exclusion, it's not something I suffer from myself, but the other day I did happen to need to go into a bank to take a check-in, and whilst I was there, I overheard an older couple inquiring about opening an account in the branch and being told you can't open an account in the branch.
You have to do it online. Yeah.
And to give, obviously, the bank the benefit of the doubt, I assume that the gentleman who was there with them would then potentially have helped them to do it online on his computer. But as you say with the trains, if in a couple of years down the line they decide that actually that we're working fine with just the machines and we don't need a person in there, then that couple's going to be completely lost, or a couple like them.
Back to where we were in the first hour. Here is a choice between spending money on something or keeping it. And if the choice is a free choice for the company, they're going to keep the money. And the person who can't buy a train ticket is collateral damage.
Absolutely. And on the other subject, just one thing that hadn't been mentioned on the payments, on the transactions and going cashless.
Yes.
I worked for a business up until about a year ago, a hotel and restaurant, and we ended up not going cashless, but we did consider it. And one of the factors we considered was actually insurance premiums as well would be lower if there was no cash on site.
I hadn't thought of that.
Because we were taking fairly large amounts of cash, and as your previous caller said, you need to have a safe on site.
I got a message.
Trustworthy staff who can take it in.
Yeah, it's a great point. I got a message from someone who was on holiday in Oklahoma and just tried to pay for some petrol with cash, and the lad behind the counter just said, "What, you want us to get robbed? We're card only." And so there are angles. There are always angles. There are always conversations. Ruben, thank you. Gosh, well, I did not expect that to be as illuminating and as educational for me as it has been. I'll just squeeze in Shane, who's in Leeds. Shane, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello,
I was at one point partially sighted myself, and I was blind in one eye, could barely see out the other. And
you got better?
I did. I had cataracts.
Oh, sensational.
And if I hadn't been able to do things online, I would have probably starved to death.
Oh, I see. So you relied on being online, and you had a computer that talked to you, presumably. You had some technology.
No.
You could just about get by.
Well, if I stuck my nose 2 centimetres from the screen, I could see things. But
which wouldn't be an option at a cash point or something like that.
No, exactly. And when I lost my leg about a year and a half ago and was wheelchair bound, I couldn't physically get to a shop to top up my gas meter, for example.
No. So you needed to be able to do that online. And
yes,
did they accommodate you when you told them what situation you were in? Would they change their requirements of you, or did you just navigate it sort of?
I was lucky. I was able. A friend of mine was able to spare some time.
Yeah, but that's what you need. That's what Alex suggested. Yeah, How are you now? I mean, crikey, you've been through it, haven't you?
Well, I could. No, it's fine now. I mean, I've got a prosthetic. I can get about. And
so you've gone from not being able to see and not being able to walk to being able to see and being able to walk.
Yes.
You're basically Eddie Murphy in the opening scene of Trading Places, aren't you?
Well, yeah, and
hallelujah.
What your earlier caller said about businesses holding cash. Well, when I used to do trade shows,
yes,
we take a lot of our money in cash.
Of course, yes.
And I didn't really feel very comfortable walking around London with tens of thousands of pounds in
I bet
my
you
pocket.
didn't. Well, you hear stories, don't you, about people taking large sums of money out at the bank to pay builders or something like that, and being relieved of it on the bus without even noticing because people are just waiting to swoop on them. So I mean, it is the obvious advantages were clear and have become clearer. But there should still be the other option, shouldn't there, for people who would be excluded the other way around? That's the bit where the pressure needs to be applied. You can say, look, of course we understand the massive drive to get as much online as possible, but don't forget the people that you're going to leave behind.
Completely agree.
Yeah, thank you, Shane. Crikey. 1 minute after 12 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It is 5 minutes after 12. An asylum seeker who was jailed in Iran for his human rights campaigning says he hasn't been able to sleep since receiving a notice that he is being moved to the Bibi Stockholm barge. He said it would be another jail for him. It can't be named for security reasons. He worked as a human rights lawyer in Iran and was imprisoned for his anti-government activities, having escaped from Iran and claimed asylum in Britain, citing political persecution. He is now one of the men likely to end up on this barge in Portland Harbour, which you just heard in the news has, we think, it's being reported, has received its first 50 inmates. I think we should talk about this. I think you should talk about this. I don't know if it's appropriate to do one of my traditional treatments of this story, but I swear to you, the question I really, really want to ask is, why is this dominating all the news bulletins? And I don't mean that as a value judgment, whether you think it's barbaric behaviour or perfectly reasonable behaviour. I'll tell you something for nothing. It will not be long before somebody somewhere starts claiming that it's far too luxurious, this barge for these people, because the argument that I don't mind at all but it's just we've reached a place now where these people have been successfully dehumanized deliberately by government. That's not an opinion. That's just counting. And if you disagree with me, it's because you have been successfully programmed to dehumanize these people. But it will be moments, it will be minutes, it will be days before somebody claims that this is too much. We can't put them up in hotels and give them 12p. We must put them somewhere worse. So we'll put them in a big converted, but it looks like a storage unit in the middle of Portland Harbour. And then someone will come along and say, well, that's too nice for them. That's too good for them. This fella's been jailed in Iran for campaigning against that regime. And now he's going to end up here. I don't know if it's a floating prison or not. I don't know who. So you've got lots of people are going to be unhappy about this. Some people don't want any foreigners being put into facilities near them. Some people will be unhappy that the facilities appear to be pretty primitive and pretty unfair. And some people, like, for example, this human rights campaigner from Iran, will be unhappy about being put in it. But why is it so huge as a story? I know, I'm not saying it shouldn't be. I want to make that absolutely clear. But a change of accommodation for 50 asylum seekers out of tens of thousands Why? I just don't know whether the tail is wagging the dog. Government seems desperate to turn this into an issue, to turn this into another issue, another wedge issue. The portrayal of most of the people coming here as being fraudulent is, I mean, if anyone was properly paying attention, that would likely fall apart now, wouldn't it? It's really weird, this. So if you're trying to deter people who have no right coming here from coming here, we seem to have reached a place now where we're doing it by treating people who have got a right to come here really badly. Oh, but they came here illegally. Well, I mean, as has been established everywhere from the House of Commons to the dog and duck, there is no legal route for a lot of these people coming out of a lot of these countries that everybody agrees are genuine sites of asylum seeking. You know, you're coming out of Afghanistan, you can't get down a legal route. You're coming out of Syria, you're coming out of Iran, wherever it may be. So I just don't know quite what is being done here. What is this designed to do? What is this designed to do? Why is this story so big? 0345 6060 The status of these people has not changed. They are genuine asylum seekers. The backlog that has seen applications not be processed is entirely the fault, entirely the responsibility of the Conservative government. And yet the numbers involved are close to negligible. Certainly the numbers involved in this barge, the Bibi Stockholm, these numbers are negligible. One of the grimmest things I saw last week was Conservative politicians suggesting that the fire brigades union's concerns about the barge were insincere or somehow politically motivated, which is one of the stupidest things I've ever heard. But hey-ho, Robert Jenrick's an immigration minister, so there's a lot of weird things going on in the world at the moment. I don't know if you heard him being interviewed by Andrew Castle on LBC yesterday. It's fair to say it was game, set and match to Andrew. Castle, there's a phrase you don't hear very often, even when he was playing. But but the, you know, the... And BBC's reported police are already investigating some threats to be from the far right to local people. I want you to explain. I don't think it would be appropriate to do the coma conundrum that I often deploy. Imagine someone had been asleep for 20 years and or even 5 years. Someone's been asleep since Brexit, and now the biggest story in town is 50 asylum seekers being moved from hotels onto a barge. Every single one of whom would much rather be working and paying their own way. So I think what does it do to you? That's the way we'll do it, actually. I'm overthinking things. It just makes me sad, but I don't know that it should necessarily. What's your emotional reaction to this story? Just tell me. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. It feels like a bit of a dog whistle. I'll tell you why it makes me sad, and you can tell me why I'm wrong. How's that? Is that fair? I'll tell you why it makes me sad. It makes me sad because you have had, partly as an attempt to excuse themselves from the epic failure of government, and partly because, as Brexit demonstrated, demonising foreigners, especially the ones with the audacity to want to come here, is politically very powerful. For everybody that it disgusts, there is a voter that it delights. So you do two things. There's two stories running in parallel. The people risking their lives in dinghies to come here are all swinging the lead and taking the mickey and haven't got any real right to be here at all. Some people believe that. Some people pretend to believe that because they don't want anybody coming here at all because they're foreign. Right? So you've had that. That dog's away. That dog's running now. There's nothing you can do about that. So then the government is charged with... Look, I mean, this is where I'd lose the plot slightly. The government has now charged itself with fixing the problem that it created. Yeah? How are we going to fix the problem that we've created? Well, either we process the applications efficiently and quickly and come up with a system of removing people from the country who don't have any right to be here, which, for the record, is a reasonable thing to do, even though it would upset other people. I think you have to have a system in place, and people who fall foul of that system have no place. I think that's reasonable. Again, I reserve the right to change my mind, and I invite you to tell me why I'm wrong. So they don't do that. They don't try and process the applications. Instead, they try to make the experience of the people applying for asylum worse than it already is. And that is the hardest question to answer. Well, maybe you won't find it hard to answer at all. So of all the choices that they had, fix it, as in process all of the applications that are coming in. And for the record, we do not process more or receive more applications than other comparable countries. So you must park that prejudice immediately if we're going to have a meaningful conversation. So what were the government's choices? I see three, at least. Number one, process the applications really quickly. Number two, leave things exactly as they are. And the deal you get in these hotels is pitiful, but somebody somewhere, probably a Tory donor, will be making a ton of money out of it. Or number three, make the experience of the asylum seeker worse than it already is. I wish now I could say to you with a straight face, that can't be what they're doing. I know it looks like that's what they're doing, but that can't be what the calculation is. But then you remember Robert Jenrick ordering that the murals of cartoon characters at a processing centre for lone children be painted over, lest the environment become too welcoming. So I like it when this happens, because sometimes when I go off on these weird pontifications, I lose sight of what the story is, and you come back and rescue me. But I know exactly what the question I want to ask you is this. I want you to tell me why you think the Conservative government has decided that the way to address the asylum-seeking issue is to make the lives of asylum seekers even more unpleasant than they are already. I want you to answer that question, and that question not only, because I've asked you about 10 others in the space of the last 8 minutes, but that's the one. Why have Suella Braverman, Robert Jenrick and Rishi Sunak looked at, you can use the word crisis because the backlog is so big, but why have they decided to address the issue of asylum seeking by making the lives of asylum seekers in this country even more unpleasant than they were already? That's the question I want you to answer. Why have they done that? And I'm not asking, have they done that? Because they clearly have. That's not an opinion, that's counting. They have. They have decided that the best way, they have decided that there are more votes in making the lives of these people even worse than they are already than there are with any other option. Question number one, why have they done that? The answer could probably be because they think there's more votes in it. So question number two then becomes, do you think they're right? But I really want you to answer the first one with something a little bit bigger than an electoral calculation. Because that's almost too bleak to contemplate, an electoral calculation. Here are some people. For the sake of argument, let us say that some of them are applying fraudulently. Some of them would not, having been processed, have a right to stay here. But the massive majority will. That's not an opinion, that's counting. And the Conservative government, led by Rishi Sunak, has decided that the way to address this issue is to make the lives of the asylum seekers worse than they are currently. Why have they done that? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Why have they decided to do that? It's 12:17. 20 minutes after 12 is the time. So I'm conscious of conducting this conversation in a way that brooks no quibbling. So, you know, the reason why these people have been put on this barge is because it is perceived as being less pleasant than a hotel. That probably admits some quibbling. It's cheaper, but it is less pleasant. Why has this government elected to address this issue by making the existence of asylum seekers worse than it is already? That's the question. Farman's in Rochester. Farman, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. Hi. As I used to be one of them around 23 years ago, I know exactly how they feel and what they go through, being honest with you, especially the ones from northern Iraq and the ones from Afghanistan. They run away from trauma, run away from death, from persecutions and everything you could imagine. Yeah. Now they come here and they have a lot of what they pay for mentally, physically, and also financially to run away from the situation they run away from. They have a great hope. They want to come here, make a new life, make a new start and everything. And now
this is what you did, is it, Farman? That's
what I was very young when I came, and I ran away from anything you could imagine from at the time when Saddam was on power in Iraq.
Okay.
Arrived to this country and had hope that I will start my life. At the time, the asylum process was not as atrocious as it is nowadays anyway, but it's still so bad. I waited for over 2 years for nothingness and to hear from immigration. While I have friends who had waited for 18 years, for example, to hear from immigration to tell them something, they could have a status or not. This is another trauma starts here, but these people are young. They are valuable assets from somewhere where they run away from persecution to come here. We can take it, we can use them for their own benefit and our country's benefit. Teach them English, sort them out in the society, make them engage. Let them start work and earn and study as soon as possible, because we know where they come from. We know where they have been before, and we know their trauma and stories. Why do I need to tell an Iraqi or Afghan person why you run away from your country?
Well, I suppose, yes. I mean, I'll answer your question, even though it's rhetorical. There has to be something in place to just establish that they are telling the truth, and you know that. Well, I hesitate to ask you this, given your own personal experience, but why do you think the government has elected to approach this problem by making the existence of people like you 23 years ago worse than it was already? Why do you think they've done it?
I think the government's trying to find a solution for problems, but they've actually bringing or introducing another problem to another problem. Rather than making things mitigated, they're making it far horrible and worse for everybody else. As I am a taxpayer now, and I used to be one of them in the past, and I consider myself a very proud British anyway.
Yes.
What is going on here is our taxes going towards these people wasted. I want it to be used wisely. I want these people to be considered as an asset, as a proper asset for the future Britain, because they are young, they are energy, they are power. And they know why they're running away, because either there's no job or security, or there is a death already waiting for them in a lot of circumstances. So they don't want to come here and start flourish anywhere they go to.
No, I think, but that's obviously there is a conscious ambition in place politically not to do that. So this is where it gets a bit reductivist. What is the end game? They're trying to put everybody off coming here, including you, really. They'd rather you hadn't come here as well. That's all I can read into this.
If I didn't come on my time at the time, the expectation was I probably would put in the army and hold the AK-47 and fight the British until Saddam being captured.
Yeah.
Because army was compulsory in Iraq, and you should have been in the army, basically.
Yes.
Instead of, and that was my reasons to run away was probably would have been one of them, and I don't want to put
I hear you.
That's my reason on a national radio.
No, I don't want you to. I'm just trying to
work for a reason.
Go on. Yes, exactly that. And the same now would be probably more true for Assad, Syria than for
Afghans, for
Afghans and the
Iraqis
Taliban, Iraqis, still Iranians. We know Yeah, I guess we don't know because they never say it out loud. But what do you think the plan is? Because we've both discussed what should be happening. They've chosen not to do that. They've chosen to do something very different. What do you think the plan is? Do you think there is a plan, or do you think that this is the plan? The plan is to be able to stand up in public and say, look at these asylum seekers. Their lives just got worse. Vote Conservative.
I think they have been saying they're going to stop this asylum seekers coming to this country for the past 23 years, as in my time. I've been here, I've been hearing it. And they probably saying it for another 230 years in the future if they don't solve the problems where the problems are generating. For example, in Iraq, use Iraqi people to stabilize their country, economy, security, everything. Use Afghan, whatever current government
aid, isn't it?
However you can manage that with their government to make the country safe and stable. So because I am a person who loves England now because I've been living here for a very long time, but I also love my country. If there were no trouble and what I faced at the time and I was expected, I would never leave my country.
Yeah, of course.
Why do I have to live away from my family, my beloved people, and come here, start a new life here, not knowing the language, not knowing anything about I don't even know what this country is when I arrived, being honest with you. And then later on, I've heard more about it. It's England, it's geographically located in this area, this and that. Because once you're in basically Asian hands, you're not allowed to know many things. But what I'm trying to emphasize here, these people, while they're here, we can use them as a good asset. And when their country is stabilized, trust me, when Iraq is stabilized, you will see 90% of the Iraqi people go back to their country and never come back to this country. Because it's not because they hate here, because it's their home. It's like English people. They may go to Australia and live there and work there for any time, but when the country is better, they would come back here.
Yes, and I mean, it cuts both ways, doesn't it? The idea that you would go back, but of course the idea that other people would no longer be compelled to leave, the push factor is addressed. Bizarrely, the same politicians that will be hoping to harvest votes by publicly making life harder for asylum seekers are also the politicians who constantly call for cuts to our foreign aid budget, which is one of the most obvious and immediate ways of improving the situation in the countries from which people are subsequently compelled to flee. Thank you, Farman. I'll just do a quick idiot's corner, I think, if I can find it. Is it David in Basingstoke says, ask this caller why these poor souls throw their passports away as they get picked up. David, mate, if you're fleeing Afghanistan, it's highly unlikely you've got a passport. That's why you're travelling illegally. But if you want answers to those questions, then listen to people like Farman. Listen to people who've been through it. Don't listen to racist provocateurs and your favourite far-right politicians and columnists who are telling you what's happening in direct contradiction of the people who've actually gone through it. Also, I think it was Tony Blair who passed a law in 2004 that makes it that means it is actually illegal to do what you've described. But you keep feeding your hate on Facebook, pal. You must have tuned in by accident. 28 minutes after 12 is the time. Why? Well, there's part of our answer, actually. This is designed to appeal to people like David in Basingstoke. Why is the government actively making life harder for asylum seekers? As government policy, answer, because people like David in Basingstoke believe that they're all secretly coming here for the weather or to take the waters, and they're not fleeing war or difficult circumstances at all. They're bogus. And therefore, if you make their life harder, they'll be less likely to come here. So it's partly to appeal to idiots and racists. That is, sadly, an inevitable part of the answer to the question. But what would they say? They wouldn't say that, would they? So why have you done this? Why have you decided to make life even harder for asylum seekers? Oh, it's to appeal to racists and idiots like David. No, you can't say that bit out loud. So what would they say out loud? Something about trying to stop the people traffickers from operating? To which you respond by saying, but this fellow was in jail in Iran and you're sticking him in the barge. What message is that supposed to send? And who is it supposed to be sent to, that message? He's going to stop using people traffickers to try to get here because he might end up on to me at least, it doesn't make sense at any turn. Couple of phone lines free in answer to that very specific question. What is the government doing? What is this policy designed to do? 0345 6060 973. It's 12:30. Amelia Cox has your headlines. 33 minutes after 12 is the time. I mean, it's not an accident, is it? There's a Sunday for Monday on the front of the Times, and there's a Sunday for Monday on the front of the Mail as well. A couple of little calls to friendly journalists, and you get a front page out of it. Tories seek Plan B for Rwanda if policy fails, and remote island plan for Channel migrants. Hitler wanted to move all the Jews to Madagascar originally, before he came up with the idea of the Holocaust. They were going to transport all the Jews to a distant island. The story on the front page of the Daily Mail has asylum seekers being moved to Ascension Island, which they first talked about in 2020, but that fell apart. Nevertheless, if you've got a friendly journalist on the Daily Mail or the Times, you can just make a quick call on a Sunday afternoon and it'll be back on the front page the very next morning. Tomorrow's front page will feature asylum seekers being moved onto this barge in Portland Harbour. Now, the question of why the government has chosen to address this issue by making life harder for asylum seekers is the question I would like you to answer. 0345 606 0973. And you are allowed to ring in and say, because they deserve it, James. This Iranian human rights campaigner who was jailed by the Iranian government managed to get here. He deserves to be stuck in, what he would describe as a floating prison. 12:35 is the time. Danny's in Aberdeen. Danny, what made you pick up the phone?
Afternoon, James.
Hello,
I think you've hit the nail on the head with a lot of the issues that are going on around this. But why I called in is I've actually been on the baby Stockholm many times and thought I could give a little more insight into what the asylum seekers will be facing when they get there.
Yes, please. How come? How come you've been on it many times?
So I was, I know it's not a popular topic, but I was on an oil and gas construction project about 10 years ago. And the infrastructure locally wasn't enough to house all of the men that were required on site.
Oh, gosh.
And a few of these barges were taken in to local docksides, and the men were housed on them. And they were, well, not affectionately, but they were referred to on site as sea prisons.
Oh, really?
Yes, they're.
But you suck it up because you're earning, and you you can see the light at the end of the tunnel, and you're on quite a good scratch while you're there.
Yeah, you're on a rotation, usually around 3-4 weeks, and then you go home for the equal amount of time. And I suppose the main thing to see is when you're there, it is essentially a place to go home, have some dinner, and then go to sleep.
Yeah.
You're working for around 14 hours a day, and then you've got a little bit of travel involved, getting back and forth as well. It is essentially a very rudimentary hotel, shall we say, but in the most
it's a storage facility. It's a human storage facility. So the more time that you are expected to spend there, the more unpleasant it becomes, essentially. So in a way, you make it sound a bit like boarding school. Because you're in lessons all day, the fact that you're being kept in dismal dormitories that look like something out of a Charles Dickens novel doesn't really affect you as much as it would if you were locked in the dormitory, or they're not locked in, if you were confined to the dormitory for much of the day.
I mean, the guys were free to come and go from the barge as they so wish. So you have local amenities that they could undertake. And what I'm reading is there's not much by the way of local amenities, and what opportunity do they actually have to kind of come on and off?
It looks like it looks like a pretty bleak landscape. And of course, you need a few quid in your pocket anyway to take advantage of local amenities. How many beds were in each cabin when you were there?
So it was single cabins. The only ones that I've seen are single cabins. I believe there was about 400 to 500 guys on there. There were some facilities. It may have had a refit in the time. There was a small gym area, and then a large kind of mess hall for your meals and all those kind of things. But that was essentially it.
So, in your view, what is the answer to the question of why the government has consciously chosen to address this issue by making life more unpleasant for asylum seekers?
Well, I think there's two things that come to mind for me immediately, and I think it'll strike chords with a certain part of their voter base that they're making life worse for these people. And then the other side of the other point would be, at some point down the line, we're going to hear about how this is fiscally responsible. And we've managed to cut this hotel bill, and we've managed to do this, and we've managed to do that. Again, that'll strike a chord with a certain part of.
But they could have bought a hotel instead of a barge, couldn't they? They could have bought there's something more to this than just the fiscal element of it. Somewhere in Westminster, people are rubbing their thighs at the bleakness of the photographs that are going to appear tomorrow. They could have bought, an abandoned hotel or done a compulsory purchase order and just made it habitable. There's something about the harder it looks, the better, the happier they are.
I think a hotel still allows the rhetoric of, these guys have got it easy.
It's a word, isn't it? We're all thinking of room service and I don't know, spa treatments, but it is literally a word. It's just beds in a building, really, but you call it a hotel, and people who are susceptible to that kind of manipulation are easily persuaded that they're living the life of Riley or having a wonderful old time. It's a weird one, isn't it? What do you think with the base? The people you're talking about, like our friend in Basingstoke a moment ago, the ones that this is designed to delight because they've been persuaded that these people don't deserve any higher level of care or accommodation. What does that change when you know that they're not swinging the lead? You know this man was in jail in Iran. You know that these people will be mostly Syrian and Afghan, because they tried for a while to pretend that they were all Albanians who were just coming here, admittedly probably being trafficked to work in illegal gangs, but it was easy to dismiss any sympathy or empathy for them. When it becomes clear that these people have fled the Middle East and all the problems there, do people still delight in the discomfort of the asylum seeker, do you think? I don't know. I genuinely don't know.
I think the best way that I could possibly describe it is that there are guys who are on that project alongside me who went through living in the establishment, hated it as much as the next person, desperate to get home, etc., will be revelling in the news that these people are going on there. And there's, unfortunately, the footballification, I don't know how else we explain it, but that is the current state of Britain for me. There's that's who it's designed to appeal strong to. Line in the sand, yeah.
And I wonder how long it'll be before they start complaining that the barges are too good for them. That's the bleakest part of my analysis this afternoon, is that it will be a matter of time before somebody pops up. You can almost predict who it will be, can't you? And starts. And you know what else they'll do? They'll say, well, what about the British homeless? Why can't they all stay on a barge? And then you'll say, can you point me to the times in the past when you've talked about homelessness in this country in a context other than attacking refugees and asylum seekers? And I go, no, of course I can't, because I couldn't give a monkey's about that. I'm the kind of person who says we must help our own, and then someone comes along and says, here, would you like to help our own? And you can't see them for dust. It's just depressing, isn't it? Laith's in Ascot. Thank you, Danny. Laith is in Ascot. Laith, what would you like to say?
Hi. Actually, I can start with answering your question or give you a little bit of what I think first.
Yes.
I came to the UK in 21, quite recent, during the red countries, isolation hotels and whatsoever.
Yes, of course.
And I came with my wife. She's English. We met in Dubai.
Right.
Her family and herself convinced me to come here, to be honest. I was quite happy making a lot more money in Dubai than here.
Yes.
Now, the way I see this is because, number one, they can do it. So why not do it?
Yeah.
Because by doing it means you are I'll give you why I refer to staying in a hotel, because I wanted to go back. I stayed 10 days in a 5-star Sofitel hotel next to Heathrow.
Yes.
And I hated it.
Yes, of course.
I wanted to go back home.
Yes.
Right? I'm spoiled, whatever it is, but that's the experience. And then after that, I lived with my in-laws for around 8 months, just looking for a place to live.
Right.
And I hated it even more.
Yeah.
And I wanted to go back. The more difficult you're making it, and of course I had to pay a lot of money in solicitor fees and so on in order to come here,
yes,
and deposits and all of that. The harder they made it, and then when you get here and you find, so the process is hard, you get here and you're like, oh, is this what I've been doing all of this for? To be on this island?
I understand.
Is this why I fought in order to come here? So similarly, anyone that is going to move from one country to the other is going to feel that.
Yeah.
And then it's up to the government whether they're going to make them feel comfortable where they are or not. I've done it many times. I was born in Kuwait.
Right.
I moved to Jordan with my family during the first Gulf War. My dad found a job in Dubai when Dubai was still rising, and then we moved with them. And then I left my family and moved to Jordan, moved to Syria. I'm used to it, but not everyone is.
No, you're right.
When you when you come to a new country, you're going to have to adapt. And the problem, and the reason the government can do it, is because it's dehumanized, like you said before. People do not see asylum seekers as any use to them. They don't see any connection. They don't understand why would Jordan or why would Syria or why would Iraq be connected to the UK in any way. A lot of people are uneducated in this country, I believe.
Well,
and I'm not talking about regular education.
Yeah.
We're talking about global, international education. And if you're moving towards a global economy or a global world where everyone understands each other, this is the first element that we need to highlight. So if the people are not being educated about the history and the drives and what is happening in the Middle East that is driving people to come to this country, then how do you expect them to humanize?
That's a very good point. And of course, it's done, I think, deliberately, because you can't sustain the notion of a bogus asylum seeker if you've also got a population that's deeply informed about the reality of life in the kind of countries that you've referred to and the countries that we know will constitute the massive majority of background for the men being put on this barge today. So I hesitate to ask you this question because you've already alluded to it, but you know, you're closer to the issue than me in many ways. What's the plan, Laith? What are they hoping to achieve with this policy?
Have less asylum seekers going somewhere else.
Will that work?
Yes, definitely would work. So it worked with Jordan. I can give you an example of how Jordan became a least popular destination. It became sort of a destination for Syrians to come and apply for Western countries.
Right.
Because if they let them in, Jordanians do not like to do any low skill work.
Right.
I'll call it low skill. It's not really.
Okay.
But service work. Everyone.
Oh, phone line's gone a bit funny. I hope it comes back round again in a minute.
Is it back?
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. So a lot of them are educated. They go to university, so they don't want to do the garbage collecting. They don't want to do driving the truck or whatsoever.
Yes.
So when the Syrians started coming in and the Iraqis, they took their jobs. I will take that job, no problem.
Yeah.
But then the more that happened, it angered the Jordanians. Like, oh, so now you want to be a truck driver because the Syrian has taken it.
Right. Yes, that sounds familiar.
Yeah,
yes.
Exactly. So the thing is, I think, the government would, if you make it harder, less asylum seekers would come, less strain on the economy will happen. And then you're already paying, I work in recruitment now, and you're already paying so much money to people that don't work.
Yes.
While you have a lot of people that can work, and you just put it in the island. Those people can work and pay for those people that do not want to work. If you want them to continue.
Yeah, but they don't. So ultimately, the bit that never really gets said out loud, for all the talk about safe routes and people traffickers, this policy is built upon a desire to see nobody coming here, really.
Yeah.
And that would that include you ultimately in terms of the ideology, if not the actual? Yeah.
It did, because when I applied, I had to prove, for example, that I had £64,000 in my bank account.
Yes. So anything, just build a bigger wall. Keep the obstacles there. Laith, thank you. You've taken me out to the break. I'll just give a little shout to Jason in Idiot's Corner, who's listened to the same conversation that you've listened to. Laith, a highly paid recruitment consultant who moved here from Dubai after living in several Middle Eastern countries as a consequence of having fallen in love with a British woman. But Jason just heard someone this fella was seeking asylum and fleeing for his life, and he now would rather go back than stay in a 5-star Sofitel hotel at Heathrow. Mate, he was in quarantine at Heathrow after coming here from Dubai with tens of thousands of pounds in the bank because he was married to a British woman and they were coming here to live. But the fact that you heard something so completely different from what words actually came out of your radio, that is what happens. That's what bigoted means. It literally means that you're so bent and stupid that you actually can't hear the words coming out of your radio. Instead, you've chosen to hear what you wanted to hear. That's incredible, but thanks for getting in touch. 12:51 is the time. And the other bit that never really gets talked about enough is that it never works. It can't work. I've been reading up a little bit on the 1970s and the BNP and the National Front for the Nigel Farage chapter in my new book, How They Broke Britain, and it would never work. You know, the people in Idiots' Corner today, if we somehow created a scenario in which no one applied for asylum in this country, they wouldn't all relax and be happy and at one with themselves and nice to be around. They'd just turn their hatred on somebody else. They'd probably turn their hatred on people like Suella Braverman and Rishi Sunak, actually. I remember when things were getting really nasty in the run-up to Brexit, shortly before Joe Cox was assassinated by a white supremacist terrorist just a few hours after Farage unveiled his Nazi Echo poster. I was getting anti-Irish racism into the studio, something that I didn't think anyone had really seen since the 1970s. Why don't you go back to Ireland then and stuff like that? And you're just like, yeah, it's always there, bubbling under. So if you successfully cease all asylum, you leave all of these people hanging or they try and seek asylum somewhere else. Jordan, which Laith referred to a moment ago, I think had the second highest per capita levels of refugees coming in from Syria. They don't suddenly all relax and go, well, that's a relief. I'm glad we've stopped all that asylum. Do you know, I think I'll go and volunteer at the local church today or I'll go and work at the food bank and start looking after our own. They won't do that. They'll just turn their bigoted hatreds elsewhere to more traditional targets, like the National Front policy in the 1970s to compulsorily repatriate people whose parents were born somewhere else. That's a brilliant Lenny Henry joke about taking the money and going back to Dudley. That's the bit I don't get. Do they not calculate that? Do they not understand that? Or do they not care? Unless, of course, I'm wrong and you can tell me what the real plan is. Evan's in Dumfries. Evan, what would you like to say?
Look, I think this is an essential and a necessary campaign strategy for the Tory government and for the Conservative Party, because we're just past midway through a term. They're losing significant popularity. They're losing by-elections, and they can't campaign on their record in the economy because it's been dismal. They can't campaign on the record in health. They can't campaign on the record in education or the environment or international policies. They can't campaign on any of their records. They've destroyed transport and have eroded the social fabric of this country. Everybody in this country... Yeah, but they got
Brexit done.
They did, but everybody in this country is financially and socially poorer than they were 10 years ago. And
yes.
That's measurable and empirical. But what they can campaign on is their success at targeting and marginalising and inviting bigotry on the most marginal people and vulnerable people in our society.
And drilling for oil. I mean, other things that they think that they can win votes with by promising to make the air less clean and drilling for oil in will this work? I think the phone line's going to go down, Evan. You're zoning in and out like a transatlantic phone call. But we'll see if it improves in answer to this question. Will it work? Because I tend not to get the calls anymore from the people who love all this stuff. I just get the odd text from them. Will it work? Will there be people today going, great, I love it? Or is anybody anywhere today going, I'm going to relax about asylum seekers now because they're no longer in hotels and they are now in less comfortable environments? I do hope their application gets processed quickly, and jolly good that we're going to save a few pounds in the meat. I don't know who it appeals to except the people you describe, and I don't know that it works because they're bottomless pits.
I don't think anybody is going to relax about it. No. I don't think that's the intention.
It's not.
It's just classic bread and circus stuff. And that we've got to keep distracting people with the enemy at the gates so that you don't realise all of the harm we've done to you over the past 10 years.
It's quite, when you put it like that, it is actually incredible what that catalogue looks like after 13 years in power. And so many of them, you lose track. Cameron, May, Johnson, Truss, Sunak, they've all had a go. Even Nadine Dorries got into the cabinet. But that catalogue of catastrophe, really, or at least awfulness that Evan lists, what are you going to campaign on? This is what they're going to campaign on. We're making the air dirtier, we're drilling for oil, and we're really treating asylum seekers badly. You thought they were being treated badly already. Poof, you ain't seen nothing yet. Look at them now in their dingy barges. Vote Conservative. Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me Evan's wrong. That's not the plan. The plan is not to actually campaign upon a platform that says, you see these desperate people from some of the nastiest places in the world, we've treated them even worse than they were being treated already. In fact, we've treated them so badly, they'll probably choose to stay in the war zone. And that would be a win for Rishi Sunak's Brexit Britain. Sarah's in Chorley. Last word probably on this, Sarah. What's it going to be?
Yeah, I'm really concerned about the safety of these people, actually, on the barge. I mean, I walked past a hotel where asylum seekers are housed, and there must have been some sort of fire alarm or something, because they were all packed into the car park.
Right.
As I was walking by. And when I looked at the picture in the paper today of this barge,
yes,
I was thinking, supposing there was a real fire, because I don't actually think there was a real fire at the hotel, but I mean, would they be able to get off? It just seemed in the picture that there was just a sort of small kind of road bit that sort of led on to the entrance of the barge, and I was just thinking, these people are just not going to be able to get off in time.
It seems unlikely that a policy designed to actually decrease the quality of these people's lives will have paid an awful lot of attention to looking after them. But there are laws in place. Of course, they started complaining about the laws last week. They complained about the fire brigade expressing concerns. They complained about lawyers expressing concerns. So anyone expressing the concerns that you're expressing is part of the problem, Sarah. I hope you understand that.
It's just, I just think this is just horrendous.
Well, it's performatively barbaric, and the question is, how many people are going to love it? How many people are going to lap it up? And why don't any of them ring me anymore? And just to add to your concern, Sarah, the outbreak management plan for the barge was released after a Freedom of Information request to NHS Dorset, and it showed that many people could be infected if there were to be an outbreak of a disease such as diphtheria on board. But why would they worry about stuff like that? Because it's only asylum seekers getting diphtheria. It's not real people. And that, I guess, is the point. And the end of this conversation for now, although I suspect we'll be returning to it imminently, and I would not be surprised if Sheila didn't get stuck in shortly as well. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also rewind live radio. All LBC's shows are there, as well as the world's greatest podcasts. You can stay up to date with all the latest news from LBC. So rewind live radio on Global Player. Download it for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Ben Kentish. But now it's time for Sheila Fogarty. 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 Now it's time for Sheila Fogarty.